was the finest Tsar that anyone had ever known. If you were cold, then he would help you with his own bare hands to build a shelter. If you were hungry, he would give you food from his own table. And if you needed gold, then he wouldn't wait for a single breath before he would reach into his own purse and your own pockets would be filled with gold. He worked well for his people and he thought about them all of the time, and never such a kind king or Tsar had ever lived in the whole of Russia. For him, at the end of each day, as he laid down upon the skins of his bed in the panelled bedroom that he called his home, he would easily fall asleep. He had no trouble, for as soon as his head would touch upon the soft pillow, then he would fall into a dreamless sleep, tired but happy, knowing that he had helped all of the people in his country. But one night, at the very tick and tock of midnight, he was awoken. He was awoken in that place between sleeping and dreaming to find that there was hanging above his bed a fox. A fox with its bright, fiery red fur, a fox with its dark-tipped tail hanging towards the ceiling and its nose pointing down towards him. He sat up and he was frightened, for such a strange vision had never crossed his mind ever before, and he was worried as to what it might mean. Now, the very next morning when he rose, he asked all of his wise men. He said to them, "What does it mean when I can see a fox hanging above my bed in the middle of the night?" His wise men would scratch and rub at their beards and their chins and try to give him some kind of answer. But amongst all of the men, there were some of them who would simply shrug their shoulders and never meet the king's gaze. When his wise men could not help him, the Tsar declared and demanded and commanded that people should come up to his great house and they should be able to tell him what his dream meant. Now, some people could make good guesses. Some people wanted to make sure that they would be friendly with the king. There was a boy, a shepherd, who lived in amongst the hard, sharp rocks in the southern part of Russia, who could not think of any kind of meaning, no meaning whatsoever to the vision of a fox that would hang above a king's bed. And he was frightened as he travelled along the road. All of the time he wondered, he worried what he would say to the Tsar himself. And as he sat down by the side of the old gravel path, a snake slipped and slithered from between the stones, raised itself up, and the boy, whose blood had turned to icy cold river water, looked at the snake, and the snake spoke. "So, my sweet friend, so you have sadness. So tell me, so perhaps I can help you." The boy, forgetting his fear, spoke to the snake and told of the king's dream. The snake smiled. "So, my friend, so once you see the king, you must tell him this. There are those inside of his court who would wish to have him not as the Tsar. They would want to have the throne for themselves. You must tell him that. But now that I have told you about the Tsar's dream, you must promise me that you will give me half of the reward that the Tsar will give to you." The boy was very pleased that the snake had told him what the dream meant, and he promised. He promised that he would give the snake half of the gold that the Tsar would give him. It didn't seem so very long afterwards that the boy was standing in front of the Tsar, and the words that had been put inside of his head by the snake spilled from his lips, and the Tsar was very pleased. But those wise men who had plotted against the Tsar were not pleased at all when they were banished from that country. But the boy, with a great satchel of gold upon his back, started to turn and make his way through the rugged rocks back to his home, when he thought to himself, "Why should I share this? Why should I share this? Why should I share this with the snake? All he has done is given me some information. I have travelled far, and it was me who stood in front of the Tsar, and as cunning and as devious as a fox. He went a different way back to his home. But he enjoyed the gold, and he forgot about the snake. And the Tsar, who thought only of all of his people, was lying in his bed after working so hard to make sure that all of the people who lived in his kingdom were happy and contented and warm and without the lack for food, when, at the very tick and tock of midnight, he looked and he saw that above his bed there was a naked, shining, silvery sword, and it hung down towards his heart. The king sat bolt upright in amongst all of the furs and skins that were the covering to his panelled bedroom's bed. And he looked, and he screamed, and he yelled, and it awoke all of the people who lived in the palace. They came and they asked, "What is the matter? Oh, why do you scream, O Tsar? What is it?" And he told them of his vision. But this time, instead of asking everyone, he demanded and commanded that the shepherd boy who had helped him last time must be brought before him to explain his dream. When the soldiers came to the shepherd boy's house, he was frightened because he knew that he had deceived the snake last time, and if he was to go to the Tsar's palace, then he would have to go past where the snake lived. But with as much courage and fortune in his heart that he could, he walked along that way, and it was as if the snake had forgotten about the way that the shepherd boy had tricked him. "So, my sweet friend, what brings you along this sharp path?" The boy was surprised that the snake did not mention the way that he had cheated him out of the gold. But he stood there and he spoke of the king's second dream, with a sharp sword with its naked blade hanging down towards the king's heart. The snake smiled. "So, if I was to tell you, you must make sure that you will share anything that the king gives you." The boy promised again, and the snake seemed to have forgotten his false promise from the first of his visits. And the snake spoke of what it was. "You see, my sweet friend, you must whisper these words to the king." And the snake whispered into the shepherd boy's ear, and the boy set off on his way, shouting behind him that he would promise to bring half of everything that the king would give him as a reward. The king stood and waited for the boy to give him the explanation for his dream. And the boy said this: "Your Majesty, I know that the sword hanging above your bed and pointing towards your heart means that those wise men that you have cast out of your great palace are now plotting and planning to raise an army and bring them towards you through the lower part of your country, and they will come and try and break down your great palace and steal everything that you have, my Tsar." Even before the words had gone from the boy's lips, the Tsar called all of his army together and went to the lower part of his kingdom and stopped the great army that was coming to kill him. Oh, the Tsar was very pleased indeed. And this time he gave the boy 2 satchels of gold and silver and diamonds and jewels. The boy, thinking that if he had plotted against that snake one time, then he could do the same again. And bold as brass, he walked along the path, and now the snake popped out. "So, my friend, what shall you give me as half of the king's treasure?" He was grateful, yes. The boy looked at the snake. "Give you half? Give you half? All I shall give you will be the tip of my sword." And here the boy drew his sword and chopped off the tip of the snake's tail. The snake left a trail of blood behind it as it slithered between the sharp rocks. And the boy, happy with what he had done, went back to his home. Some weeks turned into months, and months turned into 2 seasons, and the king, who had lain content in his bed, was woken at the very tick and tock of midnight by a vision above his bed, by the vision of a sheep. A sheep suspended in the middle of the air just below the ceiling in his bedroom. And the king was not as frightened by such a vision, but he was puzzled as to what it meant. He demanded and commanded that the boy should be brought in front of him. But the boy, the shepherd boy, was frightened. He had cheated the snake twice, but there was nothing else for it. If the Tsar had commanded, then he must go. And along that road he travelled, and when he came to the bend in the road, there was the snake waiting for him. But it was as if nothing had ever happened. It was as if the boy had not gone on a different path. It was as if the boy had not used his great sword. The snake smiled. "So, my friend, what is it that brings you along this jagged path?" The boy spoke of the king's dream about a sheep, and again the snake whispered in his ear what he should say to the Tsar. When the boy stood in front of the Tsar, he told him that the sheep suspended in the air just below his ceiling meant that within his land there would always be peace and contentment. The Tsar rewarded the boy with so much gold that he could barely stagger along the path. But the boy's heart was heavy, not just with the great burden of the gold, but with the burden of the way that he had cheated the snake that had befriended him. And as he walked back along the road, he shouted for the snake. "Snake! Snake! I have a reward for you. It is not the tip of my sword. It is not my deceitfulness. It is that I want you to have all of the gold." The snake was there to be seen, its green scaly skin shining and shimmering in the last dying rays of the sun. "So, my friend, you have realized that the king's dreams had made you behave in the way that their portent held. For when you saw the fox, you were deceitful. When you saw the sword, you were vengeful. But when you saw the sheep, then you were sweet and peaceful. And so you shall be for the rest of your life. I do not want any of that sweet reward, other than to know that you will listen to the advice I have given you." And with this, the snake slipped and slithered between the sharp rocks, and was never seen again. But the boy, the shepherd boy, always kept peace inside of his heart, and would share the gold and silver and diamonds that he had got as a reward for advice to the Tsar. In the coldest part of the country that was once known as Czechoslovakia, beside the tree line, there was a village. In this place the snow would fall heavy and hard, and lie longer in amongst all of the tall pine trees than in any other place in all of that country. And in that village there was an old couple. He was tall and strong and had worked hard all of his life, and his wife, Maria, she had worked hard too. Now, for all they had a contented life, there was one thing that was missing. Because as the children would play all around their house, they would play in the snow, they would sledge and skate, they would laugh as they threw snowballs in the air. Maria and her husband Ivan, they had never had any children of their own. The wind blew the thickest of snow-filled clouds above their village, and in this winter it lay heavier and harder than anyone could remember. No horse and cart could go along the street, and the children were let off from the school, and they would play in the snow. And Maria and Ivan, they looked out of the window and smiled to themselves as they watched the children. But Maria whispered under her breath, "Oh, Ivan, I wish in this world that we could have had some children of our own, where we could have made a snowman with them." Ivan could see that small, soft, salty tears were running down the cheek of his wife. And he spoke. "Maria, we will go out. We will go out and we will make a snowman. No, we shall make ourselves a snow child. I do not care what anyone says. We shall make ourselves a small child. Would you wish for a boy or would you wish for a girl?" Maria, she looked and said, "Oh, I have always wished that we could have a girl of our own." The two of them laughed as if they were children themselves. And as the snow fell, they fashioned the finest snow child that anyone has ever seen in all of this world. It had the best of clothes. It had the finest and longest golden hair. And it was only as Ivan was forming the face and the mouth that he suddenly staggered back and almost fell into the snow. Maria was concerned. "Oh, what is it, my husband?" Ivan had felt warm breath upon his fingers. He looked, and as he looked into the eyes of the snow child that they had made, he could see two round, blue, sparkling eyes looking back at him. He crossed himself. "Oh my goodness, wife, I cannot..." But Maria didn't hesitate for a second. The clothes and the skin of the snow child were cold to the touch, but she took the child in her arms, and all of the snow fell away from her hair, all of the snow fell away from her clothes, and in her arms she had a beautiful child. A child whose skin was as cold as the snow to the touch, but who smiled and looked at Maria and said, "Oh, Mother, Mother, you have made me, and I would wish to live with you." Maria and Ivan took the hands of the snow child, and they danced all around and smiled, and people who looked gasped, but were happy for the couple. And this child that they named Snowflake, Snowflake after those things that had formed her being, lived inside of the house with Ivan and Maria. But Snowflake would never sit by the side of the fire. Snowflake would always stand by the window and smile as she watched the ice form on the lake in the middle of the village. Snowflake would always smile to see the snow lying down on the ground. But as the days passed, Snowflake grew taller and stronger, and in such a short space of time, anyone would have taken Snowflake to have been a girl of 10, 11, 12. She was tall, and she had fine yellow hair that hung over her shoulders, bright blue eyes, and the finest of clothes, who always smiled and danced and sang when the snow lay down upon the ground. Children in the village did not question where Snowflake had come from. They would dance with her and teach her games and admire her clothes. Snowflake had many friends, and when the snow would fall, she would be in the middle of all of the children as they laughed and they danced, and she could throw snowballs the furthest. She could skate and slip and slide farther than any of the other children who lived in the village, and she had a fine, sweet, soft voice. But a winter will not last forever, and soon winter turned to spring, and green grass could be seen to poke in amongst all of the snow that lay upon the ground. Flowers could be seen to be blooming, and the sun would often pop its head through the clouds and warm the earth. And here Snowflake would stand at the window, as far as she could away from the fire, and she would always say that she was all right. "I'm fine, Mother. I am fine. I just do not wish to sit by the side of the fire or go outside in the sunshine." And Maria and Ivan would often worry that the only place that she would play would be in the heart of the forest, where the wind would not blow the snow away, where the last of the ice would still lie upon the branches. But sometimes, as with any season, the wind would blow clouds over the sun, and Snowflake would go out and play and dance with all of the children. And it made Ivan's heart dance in his chest to see his daughter happy and dancing with all of the children of the village. One day, when the sun was hidden from the clouds, and it was Midsummer's Eve, the children came and asked for Snowflake to come and dance with them, because it had been many days since she'd gone outside of the house. And they were so insistent. They grabbed hold of her hand, and even though she did not want to, they dragged her outside, and they danced merrily, danced all of the way down the middle of the street and towards the forest, and Snowflake felt happy that they were taking her to the last place in all of that village where there was still some vestige of snow lying down on the ground. They danced this way and that. They clapped their hands. They danced and they danced. There was a smell of smoke in the air, for people still lit fires inside of their homes, and Snowflake danced a great long line. Ahead of her was a boy who danced, behind her there was a girl, and they snaked their way amongst all of the trees, and they danced and they sang, and the music played so loudly, and each of the children danced to the heart of the forest. They danced further and deeper into the heart of the forest. They danced, and each of them danced towards a fire that was made of the leaves on the ground, and they danced and they jumped over it. And Snowflake, led by the boy, danced over the fire, and the girl could feel that there was nothing there in her hand, where once she'd been holding Snowflake's cold and icy hand. There was nothing, and the boy danced on, and all of the children looked back to find out how the great long midsummer dance chain had been broken. They looked. In the sky all they could see was a breath in the breeze of mist and a sigh as they danced on and wondered what had happened to Snowflake. She had danced over the flames. She had risen in the air as a mist. Maria and Ivan always wished that the snow would fall heavier and deeper and harder. And every year, in memory of a girl who had lived inside of their house but far from their fire, they made a snow child. Every farmer knows that you must use as much of your land as you can. And in Denmark, there was a farmer, a canny farmer, who would watch all of his money and make sure he used all of his land, every last single inch of it. He would dig right up to the edge of the hedges. He would plant corn until there was barely any room for him to walk around. But he was careful, and he was honest, and he could see that he could make a lot of money, a lot more money, if he could use all of the money that he'd gained from his crops and use it to buy a field in the next farmer's land. Now there was a great mound in the middle of this land, and this canny farmer would look and say, if I had that field, then I would make sure that I would use every last single inch. I wouldn't leave that mound of earth just to grow some weeds. I would grow carrots and corn upon it. With time, he eventually persuaded his neighbour to sell the field to him. The neighbour smiled to think that he had made a very good bargain for a field that he had never been able to use the mound in the middle of the field to grow anything upon, because he knew that under it there lived a troll, and the troll land was not to be disturbed. The troll land was not to be dug or ploughed or furrowed. The farmer, well, as soon as he had got this new land, out came his oxen, out came his plough, and he started to plough each and every inch of his new field. But the plough had barely dug 2 footsteps along the edge of this great mound when it started to rise up out of the earth on 4 bright red, blood-coloured pillars. And underneath there was a troll. Now the farmer wasn't unduly scared, because he knew that a troll would not come out from under his home in the sunlight. because as soon as the sunlight would touch him, then he would turn to stone. But the troll roared out, "Who is it? Who has dug the top of my home and woken me up?" The farmer spoke. It was me. I'm sorry. I didn't know that it was your home. I have just bought...
What are you going to do? Have a good mind to eat you?
Said the troll. Now I'll tell you something. This troll didn't have just one head. It didn't just have two heads. It had 3 heads. But even if you were to put these 3 heads together, then it still would not have been the brightest thing that lived in this world. For trolls, although they may be strong, trolls, although they may be big and hard and heavy, they are not the brightest in all of this world, and they stayed out of the sunlight. And I've got to tell you that the farmer made sure that he stayed out of their reach. He spoke and he said, "I'm so sorry. I just wished to use the land as best as I could and plant some crops on top of..." The troll was not best pleased.
"Well, you have woken me up in the middle of the day, and as you know, trolls do not like to be woken. What are you going to do?"
"Well, I tell you what I can do." The farmer knew that the troll was not going to be the brightest in all of the world. He looked and he said, "I tell you what I'll do. Why don't I plant some crops on top of the mound, and we can share whatever comes from the planting?" The troll looked and said,
"Well, why don't I just plant it myself?"
Well, I could do it during the day," spoke the farmer. I could do it during the day.
Well, why don't I just do it at night? And then I won't turn to stone, and then I'll get everything, and I won't have to share."
"Well, I could save you the trouble," said the farmer. I could save you the trouble, and I could do the furrowing of the ground, and I can do the planting, and I can do the reaping, and you could have half without having to do anything at all." The troll, although not the brightest thing in all of this world, quite liked the idea of getting something for doing nothing.
"And you'll promise me that you'll give me half of whatever you get that grows on the top of my home?"
"Oh, yes," said the farmer. I promise." Here he crossed his heart. "I do promise that whatever you get, you will get half of it. How about this?" And here the farmer smiled. "What about if the first year I give you the top part of whatever grows in the ground, and on the second year I give you whatever grows underneath the ground?"
"And what is it that you grow?"
said the troll. "Oh, I grow wheat and corn, and I grow carrots." The troll smiled.
"I do like the taste of wheat. I do like the taste of corn. I do like the taste of carrots. And you will share it with me. Oh, well, I will bid you good day and get out of my sight."
The troll smiled, thinking that it had made a very good bargain indeed. The mound lowered itself down, and the farmer smiled to himself, and he continued on with his ploughing. In that first year, he grew carrots. They grew fat and strong and round and crunchy, and at the end of the first year, when he came to harvest his crop, he chopped all of the green tops from the top of the carrots and placed them for the troll, and took what grew underneath the earth. And in the second year, he grew wheat and corn, and he took all of the corn and wheat that grew above the ground, and gave to the troll all of the wheat and corn roots. The troll, who was not the cleverest in all of this world, was very pleased at the fact that he got a crop every year. Even if it was a crop in the first year of useless carrot tops, and in the second year of wheat and corn roots. And so that farmer used every single inch of land and lived with a troll under a mound in the middle of a field. The merchant was famous throughout the whole of the town. I'd like to say that it was for the good things that he did, but it wasn't. This was a man who would make sure that he could squeeze as much money out of any of his fellow neighbours by any means that he could. Where he had property, he would charge them high rents. Where there was a shortage, he would make sure that he had plenty and could charge treble the amount that it was really worth. But he hated having to spend any of his money. All of the gold would be piled up by the side of his walls, and he would spend all of his day dusting it. He would spend all of his days cleaning it. He would spend all of his days guarding it. In one moment of weakness, he thought that he would take himself a wife. But when he found out that he would have to buy her clothes, that he would have to feed her, that he would have to make sure that she was warm and content in this life, he cast her from out of his house, and she was left with nothing. Nothing but the memory of being in the company of a terrible miser. He spent so much of his time making sure that he kept his gold clean and spotless and shining, that one day he forgot to eat, and one day became two, and soon he found that he could not move. And it's a terrible thing to say, but he died. And the miser was surrounded by all of the gold with which he could have done so much good, and he died in that place. And not one person in all of that country in Iceland ever felt the slightest bit of sadness for him. But it was thrown open to solicitors and lawyers to find out who all of his gold could go to. And there was one enterprising lawyer who found out that he had had a wife, and that wife had had a son that the miser had never ever seen. And unfortunately she too had died in giving birth to that son. And now this boy, who had never had two coins to rub together in all of this world, or had anything, found that he had inherited a huge amount of money. Now tears flowed in his eyes when he found out how his father had made all of this money, and all he could feel was guilt at his shoulder to try and take the money that his father had squeezed from the people in the town. He didn't know what to do, but in a dream, an old man came to him and spoke and said this: "You must take the gold, halve it, and you must make sure that you give the gold back to those people who live in the town, but do not tell them it was you who has given it to them. With the second half of the gold, you must go to that place where the river meets the sea, where the water is neither sweet nor too salty, and take the gold and throw it in the air. And whatever it is that floats to the top of the water, then that is what you shall keep of your father's fortune." The boy felt better knowing that some good could come from using his father's gold, and each night he would creep about the town and lay upon window sills and doorsteps the gold that his father had squeezed from the people of the town. And when there was only half of the gold left, he went to the side of the river and the sea, And here he took the bags of gold, and he threw them high up into the air, and watched them as they splashed into the water. And he watched and he waited to see what would float to the top of the water. He was surprised when he looked and he saw that there was a boat that was made out of paper. With a long stick, he pulled that small paper boat towards him, and found that inside of all of the folds there were 6 shining shillings. He thought that this was a fortune in itself, for he was a boy who had never known what it was to have any money whatsoever, and to have 6 shining shillings. He smiled to himself and vowed that he would set off away from that place and find his fortune upon the road. He made sure that he always carried the paper boat where anyone who passed him by could see it, and he vowed to himself that he would stop when he had got to a place where someone did not know what the boat was. And so he would walk along, and people would point at him and say, "You boy, why are you walking along the road with a paper boat by your side?" He would smile to himself and know that this was not the place to stop. Each night he would work so that he would have some food in his belly and shelter over his head, and on he would walk. "You boy, what are you doing with that boat? Why have you got that boat with you? What are you doing with that boat?" And always he would smile. But he walked until he came to the brow of a hill, and at the brow of the hill there was a farm. And he went and he asked if he could do some work for the farmer, and the farmer was pleased to see this boy, his good broad shoulders, strong in his arm with a smile upon his lips. He knew that he would be able to help him. The boy cut at the soil, the boy planted the corn, the boy worked hard, and at the end of the day he was allowed to sit down in the farmer's house. And at the end of the meal he went and lay down in the barn. But in amongst all of the straw and the hay, and in the darkness, the boy could hear an animal. He could tell with what light came from the fire inside of the farmer's house. He could tell that whatever this animal was, it had bright eyes. He could feel as it swished past him that it had fur upon its skin. He could hear it as it made the strangest sound with its voice and its throat. But he knew that it had claws and pads and paws, for it would run in amongst the straw. It would go this way and that, and whilst not being frightened, he did not know what this animal could be. And still, as he lay down, he could feel it move closer towards him. His heart quickened, but the softness of its fur took any fear from out of his heart as it lay down beside him and made the strangest sound with its throat and its mouth and its nose as it breathed and fell asleep. The boy waited until the next morning and thought that he would be able to see what this strange and curious animal would be, but it was gone. He worked all day in the fields. He cut at the hedges. He stacked the logs for the fire. He ate a meal with the farmer and the farmer's wife. And again at night, as he was laying down in the straw to fall asleep, the strange animal that made a noise with its mouth and nose and throat, with a swish of its long tail that he could see from the shadow of the farmer's fire. The next morning, the boy was going to ask the farmer what the animal was that scratched about in amongst all of the hay and ran this way and that, when from behind the farmer's house there came an animal. Small triangular ears at the top of its head covered in grey fur, a long thin tail nearly as long as a man's arm and also covered in fur, pads and paws and claws, a small black wet nose. The boy jumped back and looked and said, "What is that?" The farmer laughed and said,
"Why, of course. Everybody knows what that is. My boy, have you never seen a cat?"
Everyone laughed when they thought that this boy, who travelled so far from the sea with a boat that they had never seen, had never ever seen a cat. Every night he looked forward to the cat lying down beside him, so he could stroke at its fur and it would with its mouth and its tongue and its throat. He grew so attached to this cat that one day he turned to the farmer and said, I would wish to buy the cat." The farmer looked and said, "If you were to wish to buy this cat, then it would cost you a lot of money. It would cost you 10 shillings. The boy looked. He turned out his pockets. In all of this world, all he had were 6 shining shillings. But the farmer could see how attached the boy had become to the cat and said, "Well, if that is all that you have got, then I shall take that, and you can have the cat with my blessing." The boy was overjoyed, for this cat had become not just a friend, but it had become his companion. He put the cat upon his shoulder, and it lay at his neck, almost like a fur collar, and he walked away with his cloak upon his back, and he walked along until he came to where there was a great house with a huge hall, and a great roaring fire at its middle. The soldier who stood guard at the front of this house beckoned the boy over and said, "You are welcome here. Our king does not turn any stranger away from his door. You are welcome to sit at his table, but you will not find happiness." The boy thought that this was the strangest thing that he had ever heard, but he sat at the king's table. The king was about to speak to the boy when the boy looked and saw something that was no bigger than your thumb. It had small whiskers. It was covered in fur, with a thin red tail that looked like a piece of string. And bolder than the king, it went over to his plate and started to eat the king's food. And soon there wasn't just one of these creatures. There wasn't 10 or 20. There were hundreds of these that crept and crawled and ate the food, and if anyone tried to stop them, then they bit at them. And then there were creatures that came from the corners of the hall that were as wide as your hand, that were nearly as long as your arm, with tails like rope. The boy looked and said, "What are those? What are those?" The king spoke and said, "In my kingdom, I am plagued by mice and rats." The cat that had lain at the boy's neck like a fur collar to his cloak jumped down from his neck and grabbed one of the mice by its thin red tail and shook it around and ate it. Everyone in the hall gasped. They all gasped, for they looked and said, "What is that thing?" The boy smiled and said, "Why, it is a cat." But before he'd had a chance to tell them how he had found this cat, the cat leapt upon another of those creatures as big as your hand, a rat, which the boy had never seen. And the cat picked it up by its long, thick tail and swung it around and flung it against a wall, and it lay down dead, and another, and soon everyone looked and watched and gasped in amazement to see that cat. What it did not devour, it killed. The king was so pleased with the boy and the first cat that he had ever seen that he allowed him to sit by his right hand, and the boy sat by the side of the king. And the cat that had many kittens made sure that there was never a mouse that was left that could eat at the king's table. made sure that there was never a rat that could chase a boy from sitting at the side of a king. Lars would work hard. Lars would do the cooking, the cleaning. He would do everything that was needed in and around the house, and his father and his two brothers did nothing. And even when he did work so very hard, there was nothing that he did that they would appreciate. They would shout and scream and yell and bawl at him. And one day, and the way that a stone can be worn away by the constant drip of rainwater from the top of a cave, he had had enough. He picked up his bow and he picked up his arrows and he ran right out of the door. With his heart beating in his chest like a drum, he ran and thought that he would never stop until the anger had gone from his heart. But he had run so far and travelled such a distance that when he turned round, he discovered that he was lost. Lost in the forest that he thought that he knew so well. And he turned around. And as he turned around, he could see that the moon was rising in the sky, and darkness, like a great velvet blanket, was wrapping itself about the world. And not only was he lost, but he was frightened, for he could see eyes in amongst all of the bushes. He could hear the rustle of leaves from creatures that were getting closer to him. And in the middle of all of this fear, he heard a scream. The scream of an old man. And all of his own fear for himself disappeared as he ran to the brow of a small hill and saw that there was an old man dressed all in black, and around him he was surrounded by wolves, 24 wolves that were inching closer towards him. Now there might have been just one old man, but there were 24 wolves. And wolves, like bullies, are always strong when there are many of them. And the chiefest of all of these wolves started to get closer to him and raised itself upon its hind legs and pulled itself back and leapt into the air. But Lars did not wait for a moment, for he was the finest bowman in all of Finland, and he let fly with an arrow through the air, and it struck that wolf through the depth of its heart, and it fell to the ground dead. I've told you already, wolves are brave and strong when there are many of them, and now there was 23 wolves, and the old man still stood there, shaking and quaking. And now the second chiefest of all of the wolves started to decide that this was his chance to show that he was the strongest. Now it was the second chiefest of all of the wolves to show that it was his turn to become the leader of this pack. He raised himself back upon his great hind haunches, and as he leapt through the air, Lars let fly with another arrow, and it pierced him through the throat, and down he fell dead. And now there was 22 wolves and one old man. And I've told you already, wolves are brave when there are many of them. They had seen what had happened to their leaders, and now they skulked away and dragged the bodies of their 2 companions to feast upon them, and not upon the bones and blood of an old man. The old man was smiling now. He had seen who it was who had saved him. And even though he was smiling, his back was stiff and his shoulders were high, but he beckoned to Lars to come and stand beside him as he spoke. "Come here, young man. Come here." Lars put the bow to his back and walked up to the old man. Now the old man's shoulders were relaxed, and he said, "You have helped me, and in all of this world you deserve a reward. What is it that you would like?" Lars was far away from home. Lars was lost. Lars was cold and tired and hungry, and he spoke. "I would like, in all of this world, to sit by your fire and to eat some of your food and have a bed for the night." The old man laughed. "I would give that to any stranger that I met upon the road, and you are welcome to more than that. You must think of something better tomorrow." Lars was given food and sat by his table and was warmed by the old man's fire and slept in a room where the bed was covered, and he slept well. In a dreamless sleep he slept so well that the next morning, in between sleeping, waking and dreaming, but he knew that it was the morning, for there was a shadow that passed across his eyes, and he knew that there was someone else in the room with him. He sat up and looked and saw that there was a beautiful woman. Her voice was kind and soft. "Kind stranger, you have helped my father, and he will offer you many great things, but I will tell you this. He is a magician. He will offer you a mountain of gold. He will give to you a river of silver. He will offer you so many diamonds that they will burst your pockets. But you must ask only for the old grey mare that he keeps at the back of his house." Lars rubbed at his eyes, and in the time it had taken his hands to reach his eyes and rub the sleep away from them, the girl was gone, but there was still a shadow in the room. For the old man, the magician, was standing there. "Now, my friend, what is it that you want in this world? Would you like a mountain of gold?" And Lars said no. "Would you wish for a river of silver?" And Lars said no. "Then you must want pockets to be bursting with diamonds." And Lars said no. "In all of this world, all I would want to have, all I would wish to have, is the old grey mare that you keep at the back of the house." Once again, the old man laughed. "I think that you have been given some information by someone who lives in my house, but I promised that I would give you what you wished for, and you shall have it. And as well as the horse, you shall have the saddle. You shall have the saddle, the bridle, a fiddle to play upon, but you must only play the fiddle when you are in danger. And I shall give to you a zither. But yet again, you must only play these instruments when you feel that your life is in danger." Lars couldn't believe it. A grey horse, and a saddle, and a bridle, and a fiddle, and a zither. He was like a king upon his horse as he rode away and waved goodbye to the magician and the magician's daughter. But as he rode, he started to think that he would wish to go back home and show his father and his two brothers how great his fortune had been in his journey. But he spoke out loud, as we all do. He spoke out loud. "I could give the horse to my father. I could give the fiddle to my oldest brother, and I could give the zither to my youngest brother, and that way..." But before he'd finished his speaking, the horse stopped. It raised its head and turned to look at him and spoke. "You must not go back to your father or to your brothers. You must go along this road, and you must turn right and right and left and right, and then you will come to a castle. And in the castle you will find a king, and the king will want to buy me. But you must not sell me to the king." Lars was surprised. The horse continued on with its walking along the road. He was surprised, for He had never expected a horse to talk. But he did as he was told, and he rode along the way in the way that the horse had told him, and true to its word he came to a castle. But outside of the castle there stood a soldier, with a sword in his hand and a pistol in his belt, and a lance by his arm. And he spoke and said, "Get away, get away. The king doesn't want the likes of you coming here, with your fiddles and your zithers. He has never liked to have any kind of music inside of his home, so get away." Here the horse raised its head and spoke. "But I think that your master the king would like to see me."
A horse! A horse! A horse that can talk!
Without waiting to think, the soldier ran up the stairs and started shaking the king.
"Your Majesty! Your Majesty! There's a talking horse by the side of the door!"
The king, who had been fast asleep, looked at the soldier and said,
"A horse, you say? A talking horse? It better had be. Otherwise, I'm going to off with your head." "It's true, it's true, it really is true."
And now the king got himself dressed, went down the stairs and came to the door and looked and said,
"So, a talking horse. Talk to me, horse."
And the horse said nothing.
"Go on, talk, talk," said the soldier.
And the horse said nothing.
"Please talk."
The king was reaching for a great golden axe and making a terrible kind of a sound when the horse raised its head and spoke and said, "It's true, your majesty. I am a talking horse."
"A talking horse? Oh boy, sell the horse, sell the horse, sell the horse to me."
But Lars said no.
"Well, if you don't sell the horse, you can come inside and sit at my table and have something to eat."
Lars sat down and ate and drank with the king. And he ate, not too much. And he drank, not too much. But the king kept saying,
"Sell the horse, sell the horse, sell the horse to me."
But Lars always refused. And when the king, who had eaten too much and drunk too much, said,
"If you don't sell the horse to me, then I'll off with your head,"
Lars ran out of the great castle, and as he ran, he went past the horse, and the horse said, "What is it?" Lars spoke, "The king's going to cut me head off, and I don't..." The horse spoke again, "Tell the king to put me amongst all of his great horses, and then tomorrow morning he will be very happy. He will be very happy." The horse was placed amongst the king's old horses, with the broken backs and lame legs, and the next morning everyone cheered, because when they looked inside of the king's stable, all of the old horses that could not ride or run were now as young as colts and ponies. The king was very pleased. He said,
"I'm going to give you a reward. What would you like?"
And before Lars had a chance to ask, he was given a shirt that was made out of silver. He was given a coat that was made out of gold. And Lars walked about the town, and everyone cheered and smiled. But there was someone who lived in that kingdom who was not pleased, and he was the king's stableman. He'd looked after the king's horses for 30 years, and to see the reward that Lars had got did not make him happy. And he whispered in the king's ear,
"Your Majesty, you should find out whether this young man has used witchcraft. Tell him to go and find the Queen."
The king called for Lars to stand in front of him.
"I want to find out whether you've used witchcraft. You've got to go and find the Queen, and if you don't, it'll be worse for you."
Lars ran this way and that, and he did not know what to do. And as he ran outside, he came to where the horse stood, and the horse spoke and said, "Don't worry. What you have to do is walk me 3 times backwards up a stream. Walk me 3 times blindfold over a bridge. Turn around once and twice and 3 times, and clap your hands once and twice and 3 times, and there you will see something that will make you happy." Lars did not know how this would help to find the queen, but he did as the horse bid him to do. 3 times backwards up the stream, 3 times blindfold over a bridge. He turned around once, twice, 3 times, clapped his hands once and twice and 3 times, and when he opened his eyes and looked, there instead of the horse, there stood the queen. Lars could not believe his eyes. He'd never seen such a beautiful woman in all of Finland, and she stood there and spoke. "You have helped me. Everyone loved me more than the king, and he sent me out of the great castle, and he asked the magician to turn me into a horse. And now you have saved me. We will go back to the castle, but you must listen to me. He will not be happy, but what you must do is trust me. Trust me, and I will help you." Sure enough, Lars and the queen walked back to the castle, and when they got there, the king was not pleased, and he screamed and yelled and shouted and bawled and howled and hollered, and he said, "You have used witchcraft. I'm going to off with your head." Lars stood there, and he watched the king coming closer to him, and the king raised up a huge, shining, glittering, golden axe. He raised it high in the air, but Lars remembered what the old magician had said to him, that if he felt as if his life was in danger, then he should play the fiddle. He picked up the fiddle, and he started to play a merry jig, and everyone who listened to it couldn't stop themselves. The toes started to wriggle inside of the shoes. The feet started to clatter upon the ground. They all started to dance, including the king. They danced this way and that, and they danced all around, and the king yelled, "Stop! Stop! Stop! You're playing!" But Lars didn't stop. He kept on playing and playing until the king had no strength in his arms and his legs, and the king took the fiddle from his arms and broke it and flung it to the ground. "I'm too tired to kill you today. I'm going to do it tomorrow." And Lars was flung into the deepest, darkest dungeon, and there he lay, and he watched the sun go down, and watched the moon. He watched the moon like a great silvered coin cross the sky. And the next morning the king was there. He stood with the great golden glittering axe high in the air, and he was just about to bring it down when the queen spoke and said, "Oh my sweet, oh my love, the greatest king that ever lived, aren't we supposed to give him one last wish?"
"Yes, what is it? What do you want?"
And he flung the golden axe down upon the ground. Lars remembered the old magician's words, that he could play the zither when he felt that he was in danger. "I would wish to play the zither," said Lars. The king was worried. The zither was brought towards Lars, but the queen spoke again. "Oh my sweet, oh my love, oh greatest king that ever there was, let me tie you to a tree. And then, when you are tied to a tree, you cannot dance." The king was surprised, for all of the terrible things that he had done to the queen, that she would wish to do something to help him. He was tied to the great oak tree that was there in the middle of the grounds of the castle, and this time he smiled and he said, "Go on, play your zither, play your music, go on, play." And Lars started to play the zither. The notes rose high in the air, sweet and strong, and everyone who listened, including the king, They couldn't stop it, but their toes would wriggle inside of their shoes. Then the feet started to move as the music got sweeter and louder, and the king yelled out, "Go on, play your music!" But this time when he yelled and shouted for Lars to play, one of the roots of the tree came out of the ground, and another, and another, and another. The king was frightened. "Stop playing! Stop playing!" But the tree started to dance around. And in amongst all of the dancing people, the tree started to dance this way and that with the king still attached, screaming and yelling and shouting, and it danced right out of the gates of the castle and down to the side of the sea and right to the bottom of the sea, with the king still attached. The queen called to Lars to stop playing. "You do not have to play any more." The music faded and died, and everyone was pleased to see the back of such a terrible king. Lars lived inside of that great castle. He didn't marry the queen, but he would sit by her side, and whenever she needed counsel, or whenever she needed advice, he would whisper in her ear, and they lived in that castle for a good long time. Now Anansi is here and Anansi is there. Anansi is up in a corner and behind your chair. Anansi is here and there and everywhere. But once Anansi was a man, a good man, tall and strong and a farmer. And he worked hard for all of the land that he'd got. For as far as you could see his corn waving in the breeze. And as far as you could see all of his animals, his cows, his sheep, his goats. He'd worked hard for all of the land and all of the flocks of sheep that he had. But Anansi was not pleased when he heard that the God of all creation, who had a favourite ram, was allowing him to walk upon the earth. And this ram, the favourite of the God of all creation, could eat and stay anywhere that it wanted. But Anansi had worked hard. Anansi didn't want some ram to come to his land and eat all of his crops. But all of his friends, the other farmers, who weren't as wealthy as Anansi, all said, "You must leave the God of all creation's ram alone. You must leave him. You mustn't do anything to anger the God of all creation. For if anything happens to his ram, then he will kill any man that stops his ram." Anansi didn't care. One morning when the wind was blowing through all of his corn, he looked, and what could he see but the ram, the favourite of the God of all creation, and there it was, munching on his corn. Anansi didn't wait for a second. He took a stone as big as your thumb and threw it at the ram and scared it off. But all of his friends, the other farmers, said, "Anansi, Anansi, Anansi, you must be careful. You do not want to anger the God of all creation." But Anansi didn't listen. And the next day, well, what should he see? But the ram was there, as bold as you like, walking through all of his crops and chewing on the grass that should have been for his own cattle. Anansi took a stick that was as long as your arm and as thick as your finger, and he beat on the ram of the God of all creation and chased it away. But his friends said, "Anansi, Anansi, Anansi, you must be careful, because you do not want to anger the God of all creation." But Anansi had worked hard for the land that he'd got. Anansi had worked hard for all the cows and the sheep and the goats and the cattle. He'd worked hard for all of the wealth that was his, and he didn't see why some animal just because it was the favourite of the God of all creation, he didn't see why it should come and eat at what he had worked so hard for. But the next day, what was there? Chewing upon all of his fine maize, but the ram that was the favourite of the God of all creation. Anansi took a stick as wide as your fist, as long as your leg, and he started to beat and beat and beat on the ram that was the favourite of the God of all creation, and he scared it away. He felt proud of himself that he wasn't going to bow down to the God of all creation, who, if he knew what he had done, would have killed Anansi. But as the sun set and the moon rose and another day dawned, Anansi looked, and he could see, bigger and bolder than before, the ram that was the favourite of the God of all creation, and this time he ran at it. He took a stick, he took a stone that was as big as his own head, he raised it high in the air, as the ram that was the favourite of the God of all creation was chewing on the grass. He raised it high in the air and brought it down upon its head, and the ram that was the favourite of the God of all creation went and stopped. It closed its eyes, it fell over onto the ground, and it lay down dead. Anansi started to dance this way and that. Oh, now I will not have any trouble from the ram that is the favourite of the God of all creation. He danced all around this way and that. Oh, I have killed it, and It was then that he realised just what he had done. He had killed the ram that was the favourite of the God of all creation, and he knew that when the God of all creation found out, it would be Anansi who would be lying down as cold as a stone on the ground. And now he started to feel fear in his heart, and he ran this way and that, backwards and forwards, and as he was running this way and that, he ran into a tree, a nut tree. And as he clattered into the tree, one of the nuts, as big as a hen's egg, and as green as the grass that grows on the ground, fell down to the ground, and he might have been frightened, but he was still hungry. He picked up the nut. He bit into it. It was oily and juicy and tasted so sweet, and for just a moment he forgot about killing the ram that was the favourite of the God of all creation. And who should come along that way but Anansi's friend, Kusumbuli. Kusumbuli the snake was coming through the grass. He looked at Anansi. "Hello, my friend Anansi. It is so good to see you. Oh, and what is it that you're eating?" Anansi said, "It's one of these fine nuts from the tree that I have here. It is a beautiful nut to taste, so sweet and so oily. I wonder if you could give me just a little taste," said Kusumbuli. Anansi broke off a small piece of the nut and gave it to Kusumbuli, who loved the taste of the oil, the sweetness of the flesh of that beautiful nut. Kusumbuli pleaded with Anansi. "Oh, Anansi, please, let me taste a little more." And it was then that Anansi had an idea. "My dear friend, Kusumbuli, why not come back here later this evening, and I will let you have as many of those nuts as you like." For Anansi had a plan in his head that the blame for killing the ram that was the favourite of the God of all creation would fall upon Kusumbuli. Kusumbuli slithered and slipped away, and was pleased with himself that he was going to be getting some of the fine nuts from Anansi's tree. And while he was away, Anansi picked up that ram that was the favourite of the God of all creation. And carefully and slowly he raised that ram and placed it upon one of the branches of the nut tree. And he waited until the sun was starting to set. It didn't seem like it was very long before Cousin Bully was slithering back along that way, an excited look in his eyes and a smile upon his face. "Oh, my friend Anansi, I would wish to eat some of those nuts. Please tell me how I can get some." Anansi had a slow, confident smile on his face. My friend Cousin Bully, what you need to do is wrap yourself about the base of this nut tree and start to shake it." Cousin Bully didn't wait for a single second. He wrapped himself about the base of the nut tree and started to shake. And he shook the tree, and sure enough, a handful of those green, round nuts fell on the ground. And he untied himself from the base of the nut tree and was just about to eat one when Anansi said, no. You would like to have much more of the nuts than that. You need to shake the tree a lot harder." Anansi was wanting Cousin Bully to shake the tree so that the ram would fall from off the branch. Cousin Bully just thought that Anansi was just being kind to him. So, to please his friend, Cousin Bully wrapped himself about the base of the tree and started to shake the tree. The nuts fell down like rain, and then he shook it hard enough to make the ram fall out of the tree, and down it fell with a great and a terrible crash. Anansi was pleased, but he didn't show it. He started to weep and wail. "Oh, my friend Cousin Bully, just look what you've done. You've shaken the ram that is the favourite of the God of all creation from out of the tree, and you've killed it stone dead." Cousin Bully looked, and for all the world it looked as if him shaking the tree had shaken the ram that was the favourite of the God of all creation from out of the tree, and the fall had killed it. "Oh, what are you going to do?" said Anansi. "What am I going to do?" said Cousin Bully. "Oh, you must go," said Anansi. "You must go. You must go and tell the God of all creation that you have killed his favourite ram, and hope that he is a merciful God, and hope that he will let you go free." Cousin Bully was going through away from where the ram lay dead on the ground, and he was weeping and wailing and squirming through the grass, and who should he meet but his wife? "My husband," said Cousin Bully's wife. "My husband, why are you crying?" "It's because I have killed the God of all creation's favourite ram," said Cousin Bully. "And my husband, please tell me how you have killed the ram that is the favourite of the God of all creation." "Anansi, my friend, was helping me to get some nuts from out of the tree, and when I shook the tree so hard that the ram that is the favourite of the God of all creation fell out of the tree, and when it landed on the ground, it had died." Cousin Bully's wife looked at her husband. "My husband, please tell me, how long have sheep been able to climb trees?" Cousin Bully looked at his wife, for she was much wiser than he, and he realised then that Anansi had tried to put the blame for the death of the ram that was the favourite of the God of all creation onto him. And it was then that the two of them spoke together. Cousin Bully's wife whispered in her husband's ear just what he should do. Anansi was quite pleased with himself that he had gotten away with the murder of the ram that was the favourite of the God of all creation, when who should he see slithering through the grass But Cousin Bully, with a smile on his face, my friend, Cousin Bully, why are you still smiling? Oh, that is easy, said Cousin Bully. I have been to see the King of all creation, and when he saw that I was so honest with him, to let him know that it was me who shook the tree and shook the ram from out of the tree, and when it fell it died, that he gave me 5 cooked chickens, and he gave me 10 loaves, and he gave me 100 pieces of gold for being so honest. Anansi, when he heard that his friend Cousin Bully had got such great rewards from the God of all creation, he was angry, and he started to run this way and that, and he stamped his feet and screamed and yelled and said, "Oh, God of all creation, it was me! I killed your ram! It was me! I killed him by beating him with a stone as big as my head!" And sure enough, Anansi had screamed and yelled so loudly that the God of all creation got to hear this. Oh, and down he came, and he saw Anansi. "So it was you who killed my ram," roared the God of all creation. "Oh, yes," said Anansi, a smile upon his lips, "and I want to know just how you are going to reward me." Anansi stood there, a smile on his face. He wrung his hands together in anticipation of the fine reward that he was going to get for being so honest with the God of all creation. Well, the God of all creation, he picked up a tree as wide as a man, as long as a man can jump in 10 steps, and raised it high in the air and brought it down upon Anansi's head. Anansi broke in 2. And the God of all creation beat him again, and he broke into 4, and again into 8, and again into 16, and then he broke him into 100,000 little pieces. And the God of all creation picked up all of the small pieces of Anansi, held them in his huge hand, and blew upon them. And with each of those small pieces of Anansi, with the God of all creation's breath upon it, each piece turned into a spider, and the God of all creation blew, and blew all of the pieces to the 4 corners of the world. He spoke, "Now, Anansi, if you would ever wish to be a man again, then you will have to make sure that each of the pieces that is now a spider can be in one place at one and the same time. But you will have to hide, for if I see you, then I will blow you further and further apart." And that is why, whenever you see in a corner, you may see a web, or under a chair, you can see a spider, or over there, or up or down, or here or there, or hiding under your chair, for Anansi is everywhere. There was an old man and there was an old woman, and they lived in a house, and they had in all of this world just 1 cow and 1 sheep. Now sometimes the wife would wake up and she would say to her husband, "It's your turn to go and look after the cow." And the man would say, "No, it's your turn. I always do everything around this house." And the wife would say, "No." And he would say, "Yes, and yes, and no, and no, and yes, yes, and no, and no, and no, and yes." And there would be such a terrible row that no one would look after the cow. Now on another morning, the husband would wake up, he'd stretch and look to his wife and say, it's your turn to go and look after the sheep. But the wife would say, no. And he would say, yes, and yes, and no, and no, and yes, and no, and no, and yes. And another row would come about, and no one would look after the sheep. Now one day, the old woman looked at her husband and said, I want you to go out and get us something to eat. And the old man looked at her and said, yes. Yes, said the woman. Yes, I'm tired of us always arguing. If it's not you, then it's me. And it's about time that we started to live without arguing. The old woman was very surprised, but not half as surprised as the old man with these words coming from his lips. So down the stairs he went and out through the door, and when he was outside and pulling the potatoes and the carrots and the beetroot from out of the ground to make a fine soup, he heard a voice, and a voice shouted out, help! Help me! He looked up, he looked down, and he looked all around, but he couldn't see where the voice was coming from. He put down the potatoes, the carrots, the beetroot, and started to wander into the forest, and there in a huge square puddle of sticky black mud he saw that there was a cart that was no higher than your knee. But when he looked at it, he could see that the cart was being pulled by, not by horses, but by 4 black dogs. And inside of the cart, which had 4 golden wheels, he could see that there was a small woman. And she had on her head a crown, and on her back she had a silver dress and golden boots that were covered all over in diamonds. And the old man knew exactly who she was. She was the fairy princess, and if he was to take her from out of the mud, then she could give him 3 magic wishes. Well, the idea of getting 3 magic wishes was very good to the old man, and he stepped into the mud, and he stepped in again, and he stepped in again, and he put his hands to the back of the cart and he pushed, and the dogs pulled, and he pushed, and the dogs pulled, and he pushed and they pulled, and he pulled and he pushed and he pushed and he pulled, and he pushed that cart right out of the mud, but fell in the mud with a great and a terrible splash. And he had mud in his hair, he had mud on his nose, he had mud in his pockets and mud in his shoes, and mud all over his clothes. But the little woman, with the crown on her head, and the silver dress and the golden boots, all covered with diamonds, said, thank you, thank you, thank you. Now you have helped me, and I'm going to help you. I'm going to give you not 1, not 2, but 3 magic wishes. Have you got lots of cows? And the old man said, ha! Do I look like I've got lots of cows? I've only got 1 cow. And the little woman with the crown on her head said, well, you could use one of the wishes to wish that you could have more cows. Have you got lots of sheep? Said the little woman with the silver dress. Ha! Said the old man, do I look like I've got lots of sheep? I've only got 1 sheep in all of this world. Well, the little woman with those golden boots all covered with diamonds said, well, you could use your wish to wish for more sheep. Have you got a wife? Oh, yes, said the old man, I have a wife, and I am such a fool, for I always argue with her. Well, in that case, said the little woman, I am going to give the wishes not to you, I'm going to give them to your wife. So you'd better go home as quick as you like to see what she has wished for. The old man didn't wait for a single heartbeat. He jumped out of the mud and started to run home, and when he went in through the door, his wife sat there and said, where have you been? And where's the food? He said, you'll never guess what happened to me. I met a little woman with a crown on her head, and a silver dress and golden boots all covered with diamonds, and when I pushed her out of the mud, she gave you 3 magic wishes. His wife put her hands onto her hips, looked at him and said, I don't believe you. He said, it's true as can be, true for you and true for me. Wish for something, see what you can see. The old woman looked and said, all right then, I'll wish for something. She pointed to herself and went, I wish that there was a fire. And on top of the fire there was a pan, and in the pan there was a sausage, the biggest sausage in all of this world. And there was a rushing sound, and there was a rattling sound, and there was a great big crash. And down the chimney there came a fire, and on the fire there was a pan, and in the pan there was the biggest sausage that you ever did see in all of this world. The old man started to dance. He started to sing. You see, it's true as can be. It's true for you and true for me. You wished for a sausage, and a sausage you can see. But as he danced, he knocked the handle of the frying pan, and he knocked that sausage down onto the ground, and the old woman, who was so cross with him, went, "Oh, you're such a fool! Oh, I wish that the sausage was there on the end of your nose." And there was a rushing sound, and there was a rattling sound, and there was a great big crash. And the sausage slipped and slithered and crept and crawled and stuck itself right on the end of the old man's nose. He was still dancing, and as he danced he trod upon the sausage and he yelled, "Oh, look what you've done! You've gone and made my nose into a sausage!" The old woman was quite surprised. He said, "You had 3 wishes, and you wished for a sausage, and you wished for the sausage to be my nose. You've only got 1 wish left. You'll have to wish for the sausage to come off my nose." And the old woman said, "No, you could stay inside of the house, and nobody would get to see you, and I could still wish for a new house. I could wish for gold and silver and diamonds, more cows, more sheep, a better life in all of this world, and all you would have would be a sausage for your nose." "All I would have would be a sausage for my nose? You can't leave me like this." She walked over to him, grabbed hold of the sausage, and she pulled with all of her might, and the old man screamed, "Ow! You can't pull my nose off!" The old man sat down at the table, and the old woman looked at him. He did look funny with a sausage for his nose. She couldn't stop herself. First she started to giggle. Then she started to chortle. Then she started to laugh. "Look at you with a sausage for your nose." "Don't laugh at me. I've got a sausage for my nose. You've got to wish for it to come off the end of my nose." The old woman looked at the old man and smiled and said, "Oh, all right. I'll wish for the sausage to come off the end of your nose." And she said, I wish that the sausage would come from the end of the old man's nose." And there was a rushing sound, and there was a rattling sound, and there was a great big crash. And the sausage popped from the end of the old man's nose and wrapped itself in a huge coil on a plate on top of the table. The old woman sat down. The old man was sitting and looking at her, and they looked at the sausage, and they couldn't stop themselves. He went, she went, he went, and the 2 of them laughed to think that all they'd got for the 3 magic wishes was sausage for supper. But the very next day, the old man looked at the old woman and said, "Would you please come and help me to look after the cow and the sheep?" And the old woman said, "Yes." was once a boy who didn't know what it was to be scared. And all of his friends would look at him and say, "You don't know what it is to be scared?" And the boy said, "No." "Well, in that case," his friends would all say, "you need to climb to the top of a tree." And up the boy would climb to the top of the tallest tree in the forest. And there he would stand and they would shout out, "Do you feel scared?" And the boy said, "No." "In that case," his friend shouted, "in that case, you need to dance in the tree." And the boy would dance this way and that, and he would dance in the tree, and the tree would sway, and all he could see was the height below him. And when he came down to the bottom of the tree, he would look at his friends, and with his teeth together, he would accuse them and point a finger at them and say, "You lied to me." He would ask everyone if they knew what fear looked like, what it sounded like, what it tasted like, what it smelt like. And nothing that anyone could ask him to do would make him find fear. And soon he had had enough. He packed everything that he thought he would need on his travels, wrapped them in a great blanket, put the blanket to a bundle, put a stick to the bundle and the bundle on his back, and he waved goodbye to his mother in search of fear. Now everywhere he went, he asked people if they knew what fear looked like, what it smelt like, tasted like, sounded like, or felt like on your skin. And they would make him do things that would make you or I feel scared. But was the boy scared? No. Not a single drop of fear inside of his heart. And then one night, as the snow was falling, he could see that there was on the side of the mountain a fire. And around the fire there were standing men who had swords in their hands and pistols in their belts. And they all stood about this fire, but the boy was cold. So we pushed through all of the men, and all of the men gasped. Not even an army of men would have dared to have come to this place. And here was a boy standing amongst them, rubbing his hands to warm himself. The men looked at the boy. The boy looked at the men. "What?" said the boy. "What are you staring at?" "You, boy, do you not feel scared?" And the boy said, "No. All I can see are your swords and your pistols, and I am not frightened of you." And as he rubbed his hands to get himself warmer, he looked and he saw that there was a chair. Now the chair was made out of gold and decorated with silver stars, and he was tired. So he sat down in that great golden throne. But it was hard, and it was uncomfortable, and he wriggled and he squirmed as he sat in that place. But as he sat, all of the men gasped. "You, boy, how dare you sit in our king's throne?" The boy, without a single drop of fear in his heart, looked to the men and said, "Well, if you ask me, this is the most uncomfortable chair that I have ever sat in all of my life." And just then, through all of the men, there came the king of the robbers, because that's who these men were, with their swords and their pistols. And the king of the robbers looked at his men as if to say, "What do you think you're doing, letting this boy sit in my chair?" And he looked at the boy as if to say, "You, boy, what are you doing sitting in my chair?" But the boy just looked at the king, and the king looked at the boy, and eventually the boy said, "What? What are you staring at?" "You, boy, you must either be a fool or you do not know what it is to be scared. And if you want to be scared, then you must go and make me. You must go and make me. Go and make me a pie." "A pie?" said the boy. "How's a pie going to make me feel scared? How's a pie going to make me feel scared? Listen, boy, you need to make that pie in the middle of the graveyard, in the very heart of midnight, and then you will feel scared." All of the men agreed. "Oh yes, then he will be scared. He will be scared then. Yes, he will find fear then. He won't be such a fool then. He will find fear." The boy was given a pot of fire. The boy was given a pan that was filled with water and flour and vegetables and meat. and he pushed through all of the men, and all of the men gasped. For they'd all been sent out to do this task, but none of them had come back with a pie. Down the mountain the boy went, and as he went through all of the trees, you could see the moon from behind a cloud, and an owl hooted. And I don't know about you, but if I was in that place, then I would feel frightened. But was the boy scared? No, not a single drop of fear inside of his heart, and on he went, until he came to where there was the graveyard. The gravestones were broken. Some pointed this way and some pointed that, but the boy just looked and found a gravestone that was as flat as a table. And on top of that stone he lit the fire, and on top of the fire he cooked the water, the meat, the vegetables, the flour, and at the heart of midnight it was completed. But a voice from behind a tree rattled through the empty graveyard and spoke like this.
Is that pie for me?
And the boy just looked and said, "No, and I do not make pies for strangers." He wasn't frightened. And then, from behind the tree there came a hand that was attached to a bony skeleton arm that reached towards the pie, but the boy didn't wait. He just picked up a spoon and whacked the hand and said, "I've told you already, I don't make pies for strangers." He picked up the pot, the pan and the pie and walked away without any fear in his heart, back up the mountain, and he pushed his way through all of the men and stood in front of the king and held out the pie and said, "Here is your pie, and you lied to me." Now no one had ever spoken to the king in this way, and he did not like it. He reached towards his golden scimitar, for he was going to teach a boy a lesson that he would not forget, when the oldest of all of the robbers, who sucked on his gums as he spoke, let fly with the words, "You boy, if you want to be scared, and what you need to do is go to the bottom of the mountain. There is a tree, and on the tree there is a branch, and on the branch there is a swing, and underneath the swing there is a pool of salty water. Go there, and then you'll be scared." All of the men agreed again. "Oh yes, and you will be scared. You will be very frightened. Yes, you will be scared. You will find fear there." The boy just spoke and said, "Well, I hope I do. Otherwise, you will have lied to me." He pushed his way through all of the men, and down the mountain he went. And just as the old robber had said, there was a tree, and on the tree there was a branch, and on the branch there was a swing, and underneath the swing there was a great pool of water, because on the swing there was a baby, a small baby that was crying, weeping and wailing, and tears were rolling from its eyes and falling down and into the pool, for it was a pool of its own tears. Now, this boy might not have known what it was to be frightened, but there was no way that he would leave a baby alone on a swing on a branch of a tree. And he climbed up the tree and tried to get the baby down, but he couldn't. And as he stood at the bottom of the tree and scratched at his head and rubbed at his chin, from out of the water there appeared a beautiful woman. The fine porcelain fingers were rubbing together as she spoke to him. "Please, kind sir, please help me to get my baby brother down from off the tree. Please come and stand in this pool of water, and maybe then you will be able to get him down from off the swing." The boy didn't hesitate. He stepped into the pool of tears and reached up towards the swing, but he could not get the baby down. And the woman spoke again. "Please, kind sir, please cover yourself in all of my brother's tears, and maybe then I could stand upon your shoulders, and together we'll be tall enough to get him down. The boy lay down in the pool of tears as if it were a bath, and he covered himself in all of the baby's tears, and he bent his back. She put one hand on one shoulder, one hand upon the other shoulder, one foot upon one shoulder, one foot upon the other, and the boy straightened up, and the woman reached up, and as she reached up, she became heavier, and it squeezed the breath from out of the boy. He spoke and said, "We must find another way, for I cannot breathe with the weight of your body upon my back." But the woman said nothing, and still she reached up, and heavier she became, and soon the mud was over the tips of the boy's shoes, and he still could barely breathe. He spoke, "We must find another way. I can barely breathe. We must find another way." But the woman said nothing, and still she reached up. By now the boy thought that the last dying breath was already in his lungs, and he looked towards her legs, and her toes had turned into snakes, and her legs had turned into huge anacondas, and adders, and serpents that wrapped themselves about his chest and squeezed what little air was inside of his body. But the boy, without a single drop of fear, pulled his feet from out of the mud and stepped towards the edge of the pool of tears, and as soon as his feet touched the hard, snowy ground, the woman disappeared from off his back, and so did the tree and the pool of water and the baby, and the boy could only say to himself as he took a gulp of the fresh, clean air, "What a strange place this is, where they have women who disappear, where they have trees that disappear." He dusted himself down. "Where they have babies that hang in trees on swings." And off he walked. And as he walked along the road, he could see in the distance that there was a castle, a great castle, a castle with a tower, and everyone was standing, looking up towards this great tower. For in the tower there was a window, and in the window there was a man, and in the man's hands there was a bird with wings as white as the snow that had fallen, a beak that was as golden as the morning sun. Everyone was staring up towards the window. Everyone was crying. But he asked a girl who stood in the square at the base of the castle, looking up towards that tower, and asked her why everyone was crying. She could barely speak, but the words were clear. "It's because our queen has died, and she was a good queen. She gave everyone everything that they needed, gold and food and a roof above their heads, and now that she's dead, we need to find another king or queen. That man will throw the bird out, and whoever the bird lands upon will become the new king or the queen." Now some people wanted to be the king or the queen, and they were raising their shoulders up. Some people didn't want to be the queen or the king, so they cowered down. But the boy just stood there and looked towards the castle, towards the tower, towards the window, towards the old man and the bird. And the old man took that bird and threw it out. And it flew once, and some raised their shoulders and some cowered back. And it flew twice, and some cowered down, but others raised their shoulders. But the boy just stood there. And on the third time the bird was above the boy's head, and it came and it rested upon his shoulder, and everyone turned and looked at him and pointed and said, "You've got to be the king! You must be the king! You will have to be the king!" And when he heard these words, he felt something inside of his heart that he'd never felt before. The boy felt scared. His tongue was dry, his knees knocked, there were tears streaming from out of his eyes. And the man who'd stood in the castle in the tower by the window with the bird came down and said, "You boy, why are you crying?" The boy said, "It's because I don't know if I'm strong enough, or clever enough, or wise enough to become a king. I think that I will make mistakes and I'm frightened." The old man smiled and said, "That is a good answer. If you thought you could do everything and never make any mistakes, then you wouldn't make a good king. But listen, you will make mistakes and get things wrong. But listen and think and learn. and you will become a good king." The boy became a prince, and sometimes he made mistakes, and sometimes he got things wrong. But he listened, and he thought, and he learned, and the prince became a man. And sometimes he thought that no one would ever listen to him because he'd done things so badly, but he listened, and he thought, and he learned, and the man became a king. And he was the very best king that ever lived, because he was a boy who had found fear. There was a boy who was an orphan. On the day that his mother and father died, upon their deathbed, they said to him, "We have nothing that we can leave for you. We have nothing in all of this world except our blessing. And our blessing is that you will never know what it is to fail. You will never know what it is to go without money as we have done." And with that, they took their last breath, and the boy was left alone with nothing but their blessing. And it so happened that their blessing came true. For there was nothing in this world that the boy could not turn his hand to. There was no enterprise that he could do that he did not succeed. And soon he had a fine house, and he had lots of gold and money and fine food to eat. But it worried him, because he thought that if everything that he did always was a success, that he would not know what it was to taste failure. And he spoke with his friend and said, I want to know what it feels like not to always be a success, to find out what failure tastes like upon the tongue. I need to know. I only know how things can go right for me. I need to think of something that I can do." His friend, who was very sympathetic, looked at him and said, "In Greece, where do all of the dates come from?" The lucky boy looked and said, "Why, that's easy. They come from Egypt. They come from Egypt." "Well, in that case," said his friend, "well, in that case, what you should do is buy all of the dates in Greece and sail them back across the sea to Egypt and sell them there. Sell them in Egypt, and you will lose money, and you will know what it is to taste failure upon your tongue." The lucky boy thought to himself that this was a good idea. No one would be harmed, and he would be able to find out what it was to not always be successful. He bought as many of the baskets that he could of dates that he could find in all of Greece. And for each of the baskets, he paid 7 pieces of silver. He put them on board of ships, many ships, hundreds of ships, and sailed them all back towards Egypt. Now, many people thought that he was a fool, but he wished to know what it was not to be successful. When he landed in Cairo, he mounted all of the baskets of the dates on the backs of camels and started to set out to sell the figs. Now, it so happened that there was a king who was out hunting with all of his friends. They had with them their falcons, they had with them their guns, their swords, and they were looking for anything that they could find that they could kill and cook and put into the pot, any animals that might be in that place. But the king had become so excited that when he had drawn an arrow back upon a silver bow, he hadn't noticed that his wedding ring had fallen from his finger. It had fallen in the sand, and when he looked, he could see these camels, and at the head was the boy who knew what it was to always be a success. And for a moment, he forgot about losing the ring that he'd been given by his wife, and he looked and he said, "You boy, what are you doing? What are you doing in this place?" The boy, whose name was Dmitri, looked and said, "Your Majesty, Your Majesty, I am trying to sell my dates. I am trying to sell them here in Egypt." Well, for a moment, the king forgot all about this wonderful ring that he had lost in the sand, and he looked and he said, "You boy, you're selling dates, you're selling figs here in Egypt. Let me ask you, how much have you paid for each of those baskets of dates?" The boy looked at the king and said, "For each of the baskets, I have paid 7 pieces of silver."
7 pieces of silver?
Well, here in Egypt, if we have paid less than half a piece of silver for 2 baskets, we feel as if we have been robbed. And it was then that the boy started to explain to the king exactly why he was on this journey. He spoke to the king. "So you see, Your Majesty, it seems that whatever I do in all of this world, everything I do becomes a success. For instance," and here he pointed at the sand, "if I was to put my hand into this sand, then there is every chance that I would find gold in it." The king looked at the boy. "Any sand at all?" The boy said yes. He reached down and plunged his hand deeply into the warm desert sand, and as the sand ran through his fingers, in the middle of his palm, there was the king's wedding ring. The king was delighted. The king was more than delighted. "You have saved me from so much trouble with my wife. I will pay you not 7 pieces of silver for each of those baskets of dates. I shall pay you 14 pieces of silver for the help that you have given me." And so you see that even though Dmitri tried to find out what it was like to be unsuccessful, even in that he could not succeed. There was once a man who was so curious that to find a secret was like meat and drink to him. If he knew a secret that no one else knew, then he would smile to himself, and it would be as if he had been to a feast. And one day, he'd put his nose in through a doorway. He'd put his ear up to a window. He had a mighty morsel of a secret that no one else knew, and he was very pleased with himself. He rubbed at his stomach and rested his back against a tree. And as he rested his back against the tree, the sun shone down on him, and it was warm, and he couldn't stop himself. His eyes started to close. He just thought that at this time at midday, if he was to rest his back against the tree and only nap for a short time, then it would be all right, and maybe he could find out another secret before the day had ended. But that sleep lasted a lot longer than he had thought. For he could tell, without opening his eyes, that now the night time had wrapped itself about him, and he could hear the birds. Now, usually there would just be the noisy twittering of all of the birds, but in amongst all of the noises of the birds you could hear 2 birds talking one with another. One bird spoke and said, "Yes, soon it's going to be the time when the beautiful women come out of the ground," said the other. "Yes, I know. The beautiful women will come out of the ground." "Yes, it will be the time when the beautiful women come out of the ground, and no mortal man has ever seen it." "No mortal man has ever seen it. The curious young man thought to himself, "No mortal man has seen it. Well, I will be the one who will see it." And he jumped up and demanded of the birds, Tell me when this will happen." But the instant he had stood up, it had scared the birds away, and all he could hear was the noisy chatter amongst the leaves. But now there was a secret that he did not have, and he wanted to know the answer. All that night he looked around to try and find out when the beautiful women would come from out of the ground, and the next day in the busy market square he stood there and screamed and yelled, "Does anybody know when the beautiful women will come from out of the ground?" Everyone looked at him as if he was a fool. "Does anybody know when the beautiful women will come out of the ground?" At the back of the crowd, who were laughing and jeering and pointing at him, you could see an old man whose tip-tap, tip-tap, tip-tap of his stick upon the ground stopped. He looked towards the young man and then scurried on. And as he scurried on, the curious young man, came up to him and stopped him. "You old man, you know, don't you? You know when the beautiful women will come from out of the ground now, don't you? And you will tell me now." The old man looked at him and said, "There are things that you should know. There are things that you can learn. But there are some things that you should never know." Tell me now," said the young man. But the old man just went on his way. But the curious young man danced in front of him and behind him and all around him as he followed him up to his house. Tell me now." But the old man slammed his door in the curious young man's face, but this didn't stop him. But he kept knocking upon his door, kept shouting at the latch, Tell me now. You must tell me. No one can keep a secret for that long, no one except me." Eventually the old man had had enough. He looked at the curious young man at his door and shook his head. "Listen to me. There are things that you should know. There are things that you can learn. And there are some things that you should never know. Tell me now." All right. If it will get you from my door." The old man had not slept for all of the time that the curious young man had battered upon his door. "Tonight, the king of all of the snakes will come into the middle of the forest. He will have a great golden bowl that will be filled. It will be filled with creamy goat's milk. Take a piece of bread as big as your thumb and dip it into the milk and eat it. And then you shall see the beautiful young women come from the ground. But please promise me that you will not use this. You do not want to see the beautiful young women." "Oh, but I do," said the curious young man. "Of course I do." Anyone with any sense would perhaps have taken the warning from the old man, but curiosity is a hard mistress, and the curious young man didn't take a piece of bread as big as your thumb. No, he took a piece of bread as big as your fist, and he held it out in the sun so that it was completely dried out, and he went and waited in the forest. He waited in the crook of a branch in a tree, and I don't know how many of you have ever tried to sit down upon a wooden bench for any length of time, but on that tree his back became sore and his legs became quite weak. But the curiosity made him forget about the pain as he waited. The sun set and the moon rose in the sky, and as the curious young man looked down upon the ground, he could hear a and another, and soon there were hundreds. There were not one, not 100, not 1,000, but 100,000 snakes creeping and crawling upon the ground, and on their backs there was a golden bowl that was filled with creamy, rich goat's milk. The curious young man licked at his lips and held the piece of bread as big as his fist in his hand, and he looked, and it was then that he saw the king of the snakes, as wide as a man and as tall as a tree, with huge fangs as long as your arm, bright and silvery and sharp by the moonlight, But his curiosity drove him on, and he forgot about the pain in his back and the stiffness in his legs from sitting on that wooden bough and branch, and he jumped down, and on the backs of all of the snakes he started to run. He ran as if the wind were at his heels, and he took his piece of bread and dipped it into the creamy goat's milk, and quicker than a heartbeat he pulled it out from the creamy goat's milk as the king of the snakes raised his head high in the air and brought down his huge, sharp, silvery fangs, but missed the curious young man. For he was young, and he was strong, and he ran, and he bit at that bread dipped in the goat's milk, and thought that this was the finest that he had ever tasted. And the milk ran down his chin and cheek, but he made sure not to waste one single drop. And when he had eaten all of the bread and all of the milk, he went to a crook in a tree, by a bough, by a branch, and sat and waited. And he waited. And he waited. And the dawn broke, and still he hadn't seen the beautiful woman come from out of the ground. And now he was angry, and he went over to the old man's house, and he beat upon his door and said, "Old man, you have lied to me. I did not see the beautiful woman come from out of the ground." The old man shook his head. "Please tell me that you did not put a piece of bread as big as your thumb into the milk that was there for the king of the snakes." "No," said the curious young man. "I put a piece of bread as big as my fist into the creamy goat's milk." "You fool! There are things in this world that you should know. There are things that you can learn. But there are things that you should never know, and now you will wish that you did not know it. Go back, and this night, by the light of the moon, you will see the beautiful women." "Thank you, old man, and I pray that we do not meet each other again." "Oh, but we will." And with that, the old man slammed the door shut. The curious young man was so impatient that he went back to the forest and sat in the crook between the bough and the branch and waited all through the day until the sun went down, and by the first light of the moon, the first moonbeam that touched upon the ground, he could see rising out of the ground a diamond, clear and crystal and cut, and as big as his fist, as it raised from out of the ground, and then another, and another, and another, and another. And soon there was a ring of 8 diamonds, as big as his fist, and one, the first that had risen from out of the ground, rose higher out of the ground, and underneath the diamond there was a golden roof. And so it happened with each of the other diamonds, and under each of the roofs there was a circular tower, and out of each of those towers that were made out of silver there stepped a beautiful woman. The curious young man gasped to himself. The first that he saw he thought was the most beautiful in all of the world. She mounted the air and flew through the air and sang a sweet song like honey upon the ear. And the second, well, he thought that she was more beautiful than the first. And so it went on until all he could see was a fabulous dance of 8 beautiful women flying through the air, singing sweetly. Oh, he was in love with each and every one of them, and he sat there, hardly moving, with his back against the bough and his legs tired and stiff from resting against the hard wood of the branch. But when the sun arose, the last of the houses that had come from out of the ground started to sink, and each of the women went back to their own tower and down and under and into the ground. The curious young man waited all through the day, for he anticipated that the beautiful women would come from out of the ground each time that the moon rose. Oh, he smiled. He forgot to eat. He could not drink. He was so impatient. And the sun set and the moon arose, and it lay upon the ground in the spot where the diamonds had arisen. And he looked, and he waited, and he waited, but nothing happened. And he waited all through the night, and nothing appeared from out of the ground. And another day with his back against the tree, and another. But after 3 or 4 days he could barely walk, when he stepped down from the tree and went to the old man and said, old man, the beautiful women have not come from out of the ground." The old man shook his head.
"You did not listen. There are things that you can learn, things that you should know, and there are some things that you must never know. And now you have a piece of knowledge that you wish you did not have. For the king of the snakes only comes from out of the ground once every 7 years, and you will have to wait for another 7 years before you can dip a piece of bread in that creamy goat's milk."
The curious young man walked slowly away from the old man's house, and he waited with his back against the tree, and his back became stiffer, and his legs became weaker. For when the 7 years came again, he would not be quick enough to dodge the fangs, the sharp, silvery fangs of the king of the snakes. In the heart of India there was a Brahmin, a wise man who was walking along the road, reading from the scriptures and hoping that somewhere in this land he would find someone who would give him shelter for the night, or food. For a Brahmin was a wise man that would travel from town to town and be given food and be given shelter. But as he walked amongst the trees, he heard a terrifying and he didn't know where this noise was coming from, but there was a tone to the voice that came, this that was so sorrowful that the Brahmin wandered away from the path to find out where the noise was coming from. And what should greet his eyes but to see a tiger that was trapped inside of a cage, not a huge cage, but it had snapped shut, with a lock upon the door that a tiger could not open with its pads and paws and claws. When the tiger saw the Brahmin, it stopped its roaring, and its voice became as meek and as mild as a kitten's. "My dear Brahmin, please set me free. Please set me free from my cage. I have been trapped here." Now the Brahmin was a wise man, which meant he was no fool. And he looked at the tiger and he spoke. "Oh, well, if I was to release you, what is there to say that you would not eat me? For it is well known that tigers eat men, wise or not." The tiger licked at his lips and looked at the Brahmin, but spoke with a voice that was so sweet. "My dear Brahmin, why should I eat you when you would be the one that would free me from my jail of this cage? It is rustier, and I accidentally wandered inside and was trapped. And I know that you, as a wise man, would not want to see me trapped inside of here, so that when the hunter returns, he would kill me." Now the Brahmin could recognize that the tiger was a fine and a noble creature, but he wanted to have more reassurance, so he spoke again. I need to know that you will not eat me. Please promise me that you will not eat me." "Oh, my dear Brahmin, you have my word as a gentleman of the jungle that I would not eat you if you were to release me. So please release me as quickly as possible." The Brahmin, who always believed that everyone would tell the truth, walked over to the cage and started to undo the lock. The tiger started to pace inside of the cage and came closer and closer to him. But the Brahmin had the tiger's word, and he thought that he would be safe. He opened the door just slightly, and the tiger put out a pad, a paw, and a claw. "Please, open the door just a little bit more for me, please. Please do that, so I can escape, so that I can escape from this cage. And you will not eat me." "No, of course I wouldn't. I wouldn't eat you at all," purred the tiger. The Brahmin opened the cage just a little more, and this time the tiger could get 2 paws outside of the door. "You're definitely not going to eat me. I have your word as a gentleman of the jungle." "Oh, no, of course not. I would not eat you. Not someone who would free me from my cage. Thank you." And now the Brahmin opened the gate to the cage so that the tiger could stick out its head and its 2 paws and its 2 front legs. "Please open the door just a little more," said the tiger. The Brahmin opened up the door completely, and then the tiger licked at its lips, rubbed its paws together, and leapt onto the Brahmin, pinned him down to the ground, opened up its jaws, and the Brahmin spoke. "But I thought that you said that you would not eat me." "Well, my dear Brahmin, I lied." And here it was about to eat the Brahmin, and said, "Please, please do not eat me. But it is the law of the jungle that I am a tiger and you are a man, and I am supposed to eat you. Please," begged the Brahmin. For a second, the tiger hesitated. "Oh, all right. I shall give you a chance. I shall give you a chance, and if you can find 3 things that say that I as a tiger should not you as a Brahmin, then I will set you free. But if you cannot find anything that says that I should not eat you, then I shall eat you." The Brahmin stood up, and he cautiously thanked the tiger for this chance to prove that he should not be eaten, for he, as a wise man, was well respected in all of the villages and each and every place that he went to. People would fight to give him food or shelter for the night, and he set upon his road. And as he was walking along the road, he looked at the road and said, "Oh, my dear road, please, would you tell me that I should not be eaten by the tiger?" The road spoke. "But that is just the way that it should be, and it has always been. The tigers eat men, whether they are wise or not. And you, as a man, you walk upon my road, and when I am broken, you smash me further, and you pour hot, boiling tar on top of me. And I think," the road spoke, "I think that the tiger should eat you." The Brahmin was dismayed to hear that the road thought that the tiger should eat him, and along he went. And as he was walking along the road, he idly kicked at a stone. "Stone," spoke the Brahmin, "stone, you do not think that the tiger should eat me?" And here the stone spoke.
But of course, the tiger should eat you. That is always the way that it has been. The tiger should eat you as a man, whether you are wise or not. And, as a man, when you see me as a stone, you throw me into water, skim me upon the sea, and you use me, you smash me, you break me up, and bury me in the road to make your houses and your roads. I think that the tiger should eat you.
Now the Brahmin had asked two things. The road thought that he should be eaten by the tiger. The stone thought that he should be eaten by the tiger. And as he rested his back against a tree, the wind blew through all of the leaves and the branches. And before he had a chance to ask, the leaves and the branches in the tree started to speak.
You do not need to ask me, for I am a tree. And when you ask if the tiger should eat you, then I say yes, yes, yes. For that is the way that it has always been. You should be eaten by the tiger. And as a man, you take my wood and you rest in the shade. But when you want to have a fire, you burn me. And when you wish to make your houses or your carts, you cut me down without asking. I think that the tiger should eat you.
Now the Brahmin had asked the road, the stone, and the tree, and all had said that he should be eaten by the tiger. He couldn't stop himself, for the Brahmin's shoulders started to rise in the air as he uncontrollably sobbed at the base of the tree. He made more noise than the tiger had made inside of the cage, and he awoke a beggar man who was there by the side of the road. "Why, man, me dear fella, why are you crying?" Now, it would never have been known for a wise man to speak to a beggar, for they were of different orders. But the Brahmin's heart was so heavy in his chest that he spoke of what had happened to him, how he had set the tiger free, how the road, the stone, and the tree said that he should be eaten by the tiger. But the beggar man smiled and looked at the wise man and said, "Why, man, look, if you take me back to this tiger, I think that I'll be able to make sure he doesn't eat you." The Brahmin looked up. He was supposed to be the wise man, but there was no way that he was going to pass on a chance of being given his life for himself. And the two of them, and such a strange scene it was too, to see a wise man and a beggar man walking along the same road and talking to each other. And they walked back until they came to where they met the tiger. The tiger licked at his lips yet again. He rubbed his sharp claws together. "Oh, my wise man, oh, I see that you have been told by those three things that I should eat you. Well, I'll tell you this, I am hungry, and I am pleased to see that you have brought for me a second tasty dish, a beggar man. Now I shall eat you, and perhaps I shall start with the beggar man." The beggar man walked straight up to the tiger and spoke. "Why, man, I'm willing to get eaten by you, but before you eat me..." And here the tiger stopped as it careered towards the beggar man. "I would just like you to tell me just how it came about that you were inside of the cage in the first place." The tiger was pleased to tell his story. He spoke of how He had wandered inside of the cage, and the door had snapped shut, and he was trapped inside. And now the tiger spoke. "Now I shall eat you." Just a second," said the beggar man. "Why, I'd just like you to listen to my version of your story." The tiger was impatient, for he was hungry. But the beggar man started to talk, and this is what he said. "Right, let me get this right. You were there and in the jungle, and you were dancing in a skirt with a blue umbrella above your head. That's what happened, isn't it?" "No," said the tiger. "I wandered inside of that cage, and the door snapped shut, and I was trapped inside." "Oh, I see. I've got it now. You were juggling with jelly, and you were eating a peeled cucumber." "No. I wandered inside of the cage, the door snapped shut, and I was trapped inside." "Right. I get this now. I've got it. You were standing on one paw in the tree, and you were singing 'Twinkle, Twinkle, Bar Sheep.'" The tiger was angry now. "No, I was walking along and in the jungle, and I wandered inside of the cage, and the door snapped shut." "Right, I've got it now. You were floating down from out of the sky on a parachute and whistling 'God Save the King.'" "No," said the tiger. "No! I was in the jungle, and I wandered inside of the cage, and the cage door snapped shut. Now let me eat you!" "Oh, that cage there?" The beggar man pointed towards the cage. "Yes." "That small cage over there?" "Yes." "Oh, you wouldn't fit inside of that. You would never fit inside of that in a month of Sundays." "Yes, I did." "Before you eat me, would you just show me?" The beggar man was smiling as he spoke. "Go on, just show me. I'll soon be inside of your belly, and it would just help me with my curiosity, just to sort it out like." The tiger padded and clawed his way over towards that cage. "This is the cage that I fitted into." "Why, you couldn't even get your paw inside of that." "Yes, I can. Go on, just show me." The beggar man was smiling. Here, the tiger went over to the cage and put his huge paw inside. "Oh, I can see. I can see that it's big enough for your paw, but I don't think you'd be able to get your head inside of that cage." "Yes, I can." "Would you just show me?" The tiger put its two paws and its head inside and was about to come out of the cage when the beggar man spoke. He says, "You would never, ever fit your whole body inside of that cage. It's just not big enough." The tiger didn't wait to be told. He put his whole body inside with his tail still sticking out of the cage. "There, you see. I told you it wasn't big enough. You can't fit your tail in." The tiger reached for its tail, pulled it inside, and the beggar man slammed the cage door shut. "All right, now you have seen that I can fit inside of this cage. Now let me out." The beggar man looked at the tiger and said, "Well, no. Because the way that I see it, when the Brahmin was walking along the road, you were inside of the cage. You'd wandered in by accident. The door had slammed shut behind you. And that's just where you are now, as I bid you good day. The tiger roared. But his voice became quieter, as the Brahmin and the beggar, now the best of all friends, walked along the road and made sure that the food that was given was shared between the two of them, as they would smile and talk to each other. In the high mountains in the southernmost part of China, where you can barely see the southern stars at night, there was a great house. And in that house there was a warrior king, who was known as Wu. He was firm, but he was fair, and everyone who lived in his kingdom knew that he would treat them well if they treated each other well. And he had a daughter. His daughter's name was Yetsin. Yetsin was about 16 years old, tall, strong, straight, beautiful and clever. And she loved her father very much, and there was nothing in this world that she would not do for him. And Wu loved his own daughter, but he was lonely. For his wife, Yetsin's mother, had died some years before, and he wished to find a new wife. Well, he heard about a woman who lived in the nearby province. She was beautiful, and it was said that she was rich. But she had a daughter too, about Yetsin's age, and Wu would go to try and marry this woman. Well, he had a fine and a beautiful palace, and he had a kingdom, and of course this woman, she agreed to marry Wu. But when she and her daughter came back to his house, she would smile at him, a beautiful smile, and she would say, "Oh, my dear sweet husband, I see that your daughter Yetsin, she has a bigger room than my daughter, and I wonder if Yetsin would move out of her room and my daughter could have Yetsin's room." Wu was frightened, but he did not want to upset his new wife, and he asked Yetsin, "Yetsin, please, would you move from your room so that your new stepsister could have that room?" Well, Yetsin wanted to make sure that her father was happy and that she would do everything that he bid her, and she moved out of that room. But do you think that this new stepmother was happy? No. She went to her husband with a sweet and a sickly smile and spoke, "My dear sweet husband, I see that Yetsin, your daughter, does not do any work. I would like it if she was to go and fetch some water for me every morning." Wu asked his daughter, "Please, my daughter, I would wish for you to fetch water for your new stepmother." Yetsin did not want to upset her new stepmother, and every morning when the sun would rise, she would go down to the stream and she would take some water and bring it inside of the great palace. But do you think that this new wife was happy? No. When Wu was not looking, the look upon her face, the smile that was there, was gone.
"Yetsin, this water, it's not cold enough. This water is not sweet enough. You need to fetch me more."
And here the stepmother said,
"And I have got for you 2 buckets.
But the buckets were made out of gold, which are heavy even before they are filled with water. And Yetsin had to pick up the buckets and carry them and bring in the water. And now there was more water, and it was colder. But do you think that this new stepmother was happy? No.
She said, "You must go. You must fetch me the water that is in the lakes at the top of the mountains. The road is long, and you must get up even earlier. So you will move out of this palace and live in a cave by the side of the river."
Wu was dismayed to see that his own daughter was sent out of the palace, and she had to fetch water, but he did not want to upset his new wife, and he sadly watched his daughter arise before the sun would get to the sky, and climb up the rough and ragged steps, and go on the rough and the rocky path with the buckets. It was so heavy that it would tear at her shoes and cut at her feet, but still she went to the top of the mountain, and Yetzin would gather the buckets of water and bring them down from the lake at the top of the mountains and pour the water out in front of her new mother. And do you think that this new stepmother was happy? Yes, for she had her way, because she was now living in the palace. Her daughter had the fine room, and Yetzin was nowhere to interfere with her schemes. Every morning, Yetzin would rise and carry the heavy buckets, and her feet would be cut by the rocky path. But one day, when she went inside of the great caverns inside of the mountains, where the lakes would lie, soft and flat and silvered like a mirror, she heard a voice, a sweet, singing voice. Yetzin, as her eyes got used to the dark, could see that there was a fish with bright round golden eyes, blood-red fins at its neck, and it was no longer than your little finger, but half in the water and half out of the water. And Yetzin scooped it up with her hand and placed it into one of the buckets. And as soon as it landed inside of the water, inside of the buckets, they seemed lighter. It was as if there was no weight to them. And still the fish sang. As she went down the mountainside, her feet were not cut. And such a prize she thought she would not give to her new mother. So before she went back into the palace, she took the fish from out of the bucket and placed it inside of a bowl that still had some of the rice from the previous evening's meal. And she went inside and poured out the water, but she couldn't stop herself, because she smiled. The wicked stepmother looked at her and said, "Why do you smile?" But Yetzin would not speak. All she wanted to do was to go back to her cave and listen to the sweet song of the fish. She was amazed, because when she went back, this fish was bigger than her little finger. It was now nearly as long as her hand, and still it sang, and it sang her to sleep. And every day she would go out, happy in the knowledge that the fish would be there to sing her way up the mountainside and make sure that the buckets weren't too heavy. And every night it would sing her to sleep. But the fish got bigger, and soon it was bigger than her little finger, bigger than her hand. It was now as long as her arm, and she had no bowl or plate or cup or pot or pan to keep it in. So she placed it in the river. And every night she would go to the side of the river and say, "Oh fish, oh beautiful fish, please sing a song for me." And the fish would rise to the top of the water, and the fish would sing for her, and it would make her heart glad. It would make the buckets light. It would bring joy to every part of her being. Now the wicked stepmother, who had all of the sweet, clean water that she wanted, grew suspicious when Yetzin was always smiling, and she thought that she would find out what was causing her such happiness. And she hid behind a bush, and when Yetzin had dropped the water inside of the palace, she hid behind the bush and watched her say, "Fish, oh beautiful fish, please sing a song for me." She couldn't stop herself. The wicked stepmother gasped when she saw the fish come to the top of the water and start to sing for Yetzin. In her heart she spoke to herself, "That fish shall be mine, and it shall sing for me." But she wondered how she could do it. She waited until the next morning, and when Yetzin had gone up the path to go and fetch the water The wicked woman stood by the side of the river and said, "Oh, fish! Oh, beautiful fish! Please sing a song for me." But the fish would not rise to the top of the water. She knew that her voice was too harsh, so she tried again. "Oh, oh, fish! Oh, fish! Oh, beautiful fish! Please sing a song for me." The fish heard the bidding, came to the top of the water, but when it looked and saw that it was not yet seen, it swam beneath the rippling water. The woman spoke again out loud. "That fish shall sing for me." And she put a scheme inside of her head, and that night, when Yetzien returned, she would say to her, "Oh, Yetzien, oh, Yetzien, I would wish for you to wear a better coat than the coat that you have. Would you like to wear my beautiful coat?" The coat was filled with all of the colours of the rainbow. It had beautiful scenes of lotus flowers by the side of clear mountains. Yet Shin didn't wait for a single second, and she took off her own raggedy coat and put on the thick, warm coat of her stepmother. She was surprised but pleased that her stepmother was being kind to her, and the next day off she went to fetch the water. But the wicked stepmother stood by the side of the river with Yetzien's coat upon her back and spoke. "Oh, oh, fish, oh, beautiful fish, please sing a song for me." The fish heard the bidding, looked through the water, and could see Yetzien's coat, and it was just about to sing at the top of the water when it looked to the face and saw that it was not Yetzien. So down it swam beneath the rippling water. But this time, this wicked woman spoke to herself and said, "If that fish will not sing for me, it shall not sing for anyone." She stood again by the water's edge and spoke. "Oh, oh, fish, oh, beautiful fish, please sing a song for me." She had her back towards the river, and the fish came to the top of the water, had heard the bidding, saw the coat, was just about to start to sing when the woman reached inside of the cuff of the coat, and there she pulled out a long and slender, sharp, silvery knife. And when she turned, she plunged that knife deep into the heart of the fish and pulled it from out of the water. With its dying struggling, it wriggled at the end of the blade, and the woman was triumphant. "Good. If you will not sing for me, you shall not sing for anyone." She prepared the fish, cleaned it, cooked it, and when Yetzien came back down from the mountain, she stood at the door and said, "My sweet daughter Yetzien, would you wish to eat with your father and I at the table?" Wu thought that the fish that he ate was the best that had ever lain upon his tongue. The wicked stepmother ate twice as much as anyone. But there was something about the taste of the fish that stopped Yetzien from eating it, and she ran out from that place, but not before the wicked woman, had taken her coat back. "Here, you can wear your own raggedy coat." Yetzien, heartbroken, stood by the side of the river by the light of the moon and said, "Oh, fish, oh, beautiful fish, please sing a song for me." Nothing. "Fish, oh, beautiful fish, please sing a song for me." And still there was nothing. Fish, oh, beautiful fish, please sing a song for me." As she stood there, the salty tears ran down her cheek and fell down and into the river, and as they rippled, as her reflection cleared, she could see that standing next to her was an old man. He placed his arm about her shoulder and said, "Yetzien, Your fish loved you very much. What you must do is go to the back of the house, and there you will find your fish's bones. Yetsin sobbed. There you will find your fish's bones. You must take each of the bones and wrap them in a blanket, and every night you can make a wish. But every night you must wish for one thing for yourself and one thing for someone else. Yet Xin was still so upset from hearing that a fish was dead that she rubbed at her eyes, and when she looked, the old man was gone. But she didn't hesitate. She went to the back of the house, and there she collected up all of the bones as the wicked stepmother smiled and said, "So, do you wish to make some soup from the bones of your fish? Oh, beautiful fish." Yet Xin paid no notice to her and ran back to her cave. She didn't truly believe that these bones could be used to wish for things, but she took the biggest of all of the bones and held it in her hand and held it up and said, "I would wish that there would be a door to this cave so that I can lock the terrible world outside away. And I also wish that everyone in this village will have a fire that will never go out." No sooner had she said these words than the door appeared to the mouth of a cave, and she could hear the people cheering inside of the village as all of them watched in wonder at a fire in their fireplaces that would not go out. So she knew that it was true. And every night she would wish one thing for herself and one thing for someone else. She wished for fine clothes for herself, and that no one would know what it was to be sick. She would wish for good shoes for her feet, and she would wish that the old man who had never walked for so many years, the old man who had never walked for nearly 20 years, that he could get up and dance. And it was always the same. One thing for herself and one thing for someone else. And soon her cave was like a beautiful palace in itself, and it came about stories about a beautiful woman who lived in a cave by the side of a palace, and the story travelled across the sea and was heard by a king who was very fond of having great possessions, and he sailed the 3 days across the sea to come and look at this woman for himself. And when he saw Yet Xin, he fell deeply in love with her and begged Wu to marry her. Well, the wicked stepmother was glad to get the girl away from her, and Wu, he knew that his daughter would come and visit him, and he agreed. Yet Xin and the king were married, and they sailed for 3 days back to his kingdom. And when he had fallen asleep, Yet Xin would creep down, open up the blanket, and take out one of the fish's bones and wish for one thing for herself and one thing for someone else. Her new husband, the king, became curious, and one night he pretended to be asleep. And he waited until Yet Xin had crept down to the bowels of that castle, and he looked and he peeped behind a curtain. He peeped and he looked, and there he could see Yet Xin open up the blanket, take a fish's bone, and wish for one thing for herself. He looked, and he thought that she could see him hiding behind the curtain, and he raced back upstairs and pretended to sleep, and he did not hear her wish for something for someone else, for she'd wished for a fine table to be inside of the castle, and she'd wished for windows to be placed in all of the temples. One thing for herself and one thing for someone else. The king, the next morning, after he'd seen this great secret, spoke to his wife and said, "My dear wife, I think it would be a very good idea if you were to go and visit your father Wu." It had been a long time since Yet Xin had seen her father, and she sailed for 3 days over the sea to go and visit her father. And on the first night that the king was alone, he crept down the stairs, reached towards the blanket, and he spoke to himself in the darkness. No, these things do not belong to me, and I cannot take advantage of Yetzin just because she is not here. And back he went to bed. On the second night, he opened up the blanket and reached and held one of the bones, but again he felt guilty that he was doing something behind his wife's back. But on the third night, he could not stop himself. He took a bone and held it high above his head and said, "I would wish that all of the stones inside of this castle were made out of gold." One by one, before his very eyes, each and every one of the bricks in the castle turned to gold. And he put the bone away and hid it and went to bed. When he had hidden behind the curtain, he'd only seen Yetzin wish for one thing for herself. He had not waited to see her wish for something for someone else. When Yetzin returned, in the distance she could see the castle. She could see that it was glittering and gleaming, and she knew it wasn't just the fact that the rain had fallen upon it and the sun was shining and giving it a golden glow. She raced, she got back, she found her husband and said, "Oh, husband, 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 please tell me that you have not used one of my fish's bones." "Oh, I did, and I have wished for the castle to be made out of gold." "Please tell me," she spoke, "please tell me that you used one wish for yourself and one wish for someone else." "No, I didn't do that. I didn't need to. I was quite happy with the golden castle." Yetzin ran to the blanket, opened up and took the bone and said, "I would wish that the windows inside of this castle were all made out of diamonds and rubies." Nothing. "I would wish that everyone in this country would know what it was to be fit and healthy." Nothing. Now her husband, the new king, fell to his knees and said, "Please forgive me. I did not know that I had to wish for two things, one thing for myself and one thing for someone else." Yetzin looked at him, calmly but coldly. "My husband, we will have to travel so that we can find the old man or the fish. We will travel from the top of the world to the bottom of the world, to the side of the world and around. We will visit every river, every cavern, every lake, every stream, every ocean, every sea, and we shall try and find the fish or the old man." The two of them travelled away from that place. They travelled from the top of the world, hand in hand, to the side of the world, side by side. But on one night, Yetzin looked at her husband and said, "We cannot travel to every place together. Now we will have to separate. You must look by the day, and I will look by night, to try and find the fish." And they would travel, she by night and he by day, and they would stand by every river, lake, stream, every sea, every ocean, and they would stand and say, "Fish, oh fish, oh beautiful fish, please sing a song for me." And they travelled so long, and they travelled so wide, that soon it was difficult to see the new king or Yetzin. So if you stand by the side of a rippling stream, and the sun is high in the sky, in the reflection and the movement of the water, you might see a king pleading for a fish to sing to him a song for me. By moonlight, when the moon is in the sky, as the waves crash all about you, you might see the figure reflected in the waves and the foam and the spume. You may see the figure of a woman, tall, strong and beautiful, speaking as the waves crash around and saying, "Oh beautiful fish, please sing a song for me." Once there was a nation of people who were known as Eskimos. That was the name that others gave to them, but they never lost their own name, for amongst themselves they would always know themselves as the Inuit. They lived in the far reaches of what we now call Alaska, and there was, in the beginning, no light. It was always dark, except when they sat round their fires, the fires that they would make from the driftwood that would crash upon the rocks and upon the sand and the sea. They didn't know when it was daytime or when it was night time, and some would rise when others would sleep, and some would work when others would rest, and no one knew. No one knew when it was the night or the day, for it was always dark. Even the crow wasn't sure about this, and there were not many things that the crow did not know, for he was the cleverest animal in all of the world. Everybody knew this, because Crow always kept telling them just how clever he was. He said to them all, "What we need is to have some daylight." The Inuit sat around their driftwood fires and looked at the crow and said, "That's all well and good, but we have no idea what daylight is." The crow said to them, "If you had some daylight, then you would be able to see, and you would be able to tell when it was daytime and when it was nighttime. You could find your way along paths. You would not be lost in the mountains." All of the Inuit who sat around the fire agreed. "Yes, that's really what we want. We want some daylight, but where can we find it, Crow? We really need some daylight." "You are so clever, Mr. Crow. Why don't you go and fetch us some?" "Yes, I am clever," agreed the crow. He pretended that he was not frightened, for really he did not know how he would bring some daylight. "I am clever, and I will see if I can fetch you some daylight. If I fetch you some daylight, though, you must make sure that you are happy with what I bring, for I will not be able to carry much." They all agreed, and they said that Crow was the cleverest of all of the animals in all of the world, which fed his pride and gave him the courage to set off to fly to find some daylight. The crow flew and flew and flew and looked to try and find where the daylight could be. And then he saw some daylight streaming out of an ice lodge right at the edge of the world. At the edge of the world, by the side of a forest where there was a frozen lake. The crow perched on a tree above the lodge and watched. For just by the small speck of daylight that had escaped from out of the ice lodge, he knew that there must be more inside. And then he was not disappointed, for a beautiful woman came out of the lodge, and as she moved the sealskin closing to the door of the lodge, he could see that there must be a lot of daylight in that place. He could see that she was the chief's daughter, and the crow, who is the cleverest animal in all of the world, not just because he says so, he turned himself by stepping out of his skin into a speck of dust, and he landed in the hair of the chief's daughter. So when she returned back inside of the ice lodge, he could see that there was daylight inside, just a small speck that lit up the whole of that lodge, and inside there was the chief. There was the chief's daughter, and there was the chief's daughter's son, the chief's grandson, and he was sitting there, and Crow, still as a speck of dust, fell from out of the chief's daughter's hair and landed in the ear of the chief's grandson. Once inside of there, he whispered inside of the chief's grandson's ear, he whispered,
say that you want to have some daylight to play with.
The chief's grandson started to speak.
I want some daylight to play with.
But nothing happened, for the chief and his daughter knew that it was dangerous for him to play with some daylight in case it should escape and someone should steal it. But this time the crow, as a speck of dust in the chief's grandson's ear, whispered again,
Shout and scream and yell for daylight.
The chief's grandson screamed and yelled and shouted and bawled and howled and hollered, until at last the chief's daughter reached inside of a box, a beautifully carved box that lay by the side of the fire, and opened it up and took out a handful of daylight, no bigger than a ball of the size of your fist. She took it and gave it to the baby to play with. The baby threw it up in the air. He caught it, he rolled it, and everywhere that he rolled it, pieces of the daylight would fall off from it. But the crow was thinking,
How will I be able to get that daylight back to all of my friends as they sit by the fire?
He whispered in the chief's grandson's ear.
Ask for a piece of string. I want a piece of string. Give me a piece of string. Give me a piece of string.
The chief, who was wishing to sleep, reached down and took a piece of string, and he wrapped it about the daylight so that his grandson could play with the daylight and not disturb him any more.
Now,
said the crow,
now, crawl along the ice tunnel to the doorway, and then take the daylight with you.
The chief and his daughter were quite pleased that the grandson was playing quietly, and they didn't really notice that he crawled along the tunnel that led to the door of the ice lodge with the daylight on a piece of string. And as soon as he got to the door, the crow, who had once been a speck of dust inside of the chief's grandson's ear, he floated upon the wind, regained his skin, and turned himself back into the crow. And he grabbed hold of the string and flew before the chief's grandson could grab hold of the daylight. Everywhere that crow went, pieces of the daylight fell onto the ground. Everyone was happy. Everyone was pleased. A small piece of daylight here and there was just enough. But the crow wanted to show everyone just how clever he was. So he scritted and scratched at the pieces of daylight so that the daylight spread all around. And by the time he got back to the driftwood fire, he only had a small piece of daylight. He only had a small piece of daylight that would only light up half of the day. But the Inuit were grateful to the crow. Grateful to the crow that they knew when it was day and when it was night. And they quite liked the idea that only half of a day would be for work, and one half of the day would be for sleep and rest. And from that time, a crow has never been killed by the hand of an Inuit. There were two brothers-in-law. One was called Ganji, and he had many children. And there was a man called Werpan, and he too had many children. These men were brothers-in-law, but it was Ganji and his children who would always go down and do all of the fishing. When they got to the salty water, they could see that the water was clean and clear, right down to the bottom. They could see the fish just lying there, flat fish that were lying amongst all of the waves, and they did not wait for a second. It was easy to see all the different kinds of fish, and with their spears they walked through the water up to their knees, and soon had many fish, upon strings and hooks and on their spears. They went back to the side of the shore where the waves crashed and there was a sting of brine in the air, and they started to gather firewood, and they wanted to cook the fish. And when they wanted to cook the fish, they separated the good meat from the fat. Ganji and his children grabbed bark from off the trees, and they wrapped up the good meat with some of the fat, and went back to the camp where Werpan and his children were. When they got back to the camp, they sat down, and Ganji called out to one of Werpan's children to come and get their share. But Ganji, he had separated the best bits of meat for himself and for his children. They'd kept the sweet fresh meat for themselves, and they gave the small bits, the old bits, the fat to Werpan and his family. When his children, Werpan's children, ran over and grabbed the bark parcel of meat, and they took it to his father, Werpan untied it. When he opened it, he could see that he and his family had been given the old pieces of meat, the fatty pieces of meat. And then he spoke, and there was no joy in his voice. In fact, there was anger at the tip of his tongue. They have kept the fresh sweet ones for themselves. But since they had not gone out fishing, they ate what they had been given, and then afterwards, with anger in his heart, Werpan stood up and said to Ganji, "You gave me and my kids old pieces of fish, while you and your family had the fresh sweet pieces of meat." And they soon started arguing. Ganji said, "Well, you should have gone fishing for yourselves. If you are so fussy, then why didn't you come and help us?" So they argued and argued and argued until Ganji, who had been out fishing, grabbed a handful of hot coals and threw them at his brother-in-law Werpan. Ganji grabbed a smooth rock and he threw it at Werpan and hit him right in the middle of his chest. But Ganji was frightened. Ganji was frightened about what Werpan might do to him, and he started to jump around in fear and run around in a circle. And as he jumped, he started to flap his arms, and from jumping, he started to fly. He took to the air higher and higher, and as he flew, he turned into a bird, a jabiru without a beak, and flew away. Then Werpan, he had been struck by Ganji's coals. He had been struck by the great rock, and he told his children to bring him a spear. And he started to point the spear up into the air where Ganji was as he flew all around. But he could see that the spear was too long. It was bending. It was bending backwards. So he took a sharp rock and cut the spear shorter. And the second time he aimed it and threw it at Ganji, and his aim was just right. He had said, "Please don't let me miss, please don't let me miss." He threw the spear up into the sky where Ganji was flying around. The spear went into Ganji's mouth, and it poked out. It made a beak. Ganji fell from the sky and landed far away from that place. Werpan now was frightened. He said to his children, "Let's get out of here while we are still alive. Come on, as fast as we can. We'll head away. We'll head away from here." As they were running, they started to flap their arms. They started to run and their legs grew longer. Their necks grew longer too, and as they ran, they started to change into birds, into emus. That made them run faster. Their feathers were all grey because of the ash that Ganji had thrown, and they had a bump at their front where they'd been hit by the stone. Everyone can remember this story, for the way that they cook the meat is just the same. To cook it in bark, but to make sure they wipe the ash from it. And the story of the emu and the gibberoo that Ganji turned into is true. Because if you look at an emu has an egg that is the same size and shape as the stone that was thrown at Werpan.